Marvel. Plundering the Multiverse, starting with the horse charm. Chapter 41. Based on Su Ling's understanding of the system, taking on a disciple is just a let-in. The real focus is to make a superhero's strength significantly improve. In other words, it's not about casually finding a random hero, signing a master-disciple agreement, and then teaching them how to fight, and the mission is complete. Instead, it requires the other party to undergo a more profound, substantial growth. Su Ling quickly reviewed all the superheroes who had appeared or were about to appear in his mind. The first to be excluded was Deadpool Wade, with whom he had recently fought alongside. This guy has a healing factor, which is already an incredibly powerful ability. If he had to name a weakness, it would be that Wade's thought process is a little problematic. Moreover, even if he were to forcibly enhance Deadpool's strength, what could he possibly teach this guy? Teach him how to elevate his mouth cannon to a nuclear explosion level. If there was one area to improve, it's that Wade has no superpowers. Like firing lasers or using energy impact waves. But such abilities are clearly not achievable through mere effort. And Su Ling couldn't possibly take out the talismans from his sea of consciousness to give to Wade. So, he was directly passed over by Su Ling. As for Frank, that guy is labeled an anti-hero by Marvel official. Even if he belongs to a type of superhero, Su Ling couldn't think of anything that could improve him. The Punisher's skill in modifying firearms is even a skill Su Ling wants to learn. Not to mention an uncle nearing 40 calling him master, the thought alone gives him goosebumps. It can't be Tony, can it? Swirling the wine glass in his hand, Su Ling continued to ponder. Since the keywords for this mission have been determined, he needs to find a superhero who has great potential but hasn't developed it yet, or one who is already strong but has shortcomings. Gently swirling the wine glass, watching the liquid ripple against the glass, Su Ling murmured in his heart. If I'm really going to do this mission, I need to expand my social circle first. Just as he was about to get up. Snap. A card resembling a bank card was pushed in front of him by Weasel. Here you go. The money for the last 3 commissions, minus the cut, is all in there. The password is 6 sixes. Su Ling was stunned. Didn't we agree that all the money would go to you? These 3 commissions were all related to the Skull Society. That day's explosion, Su Ling and Frank almost blew up their core stronghold. So the commissions were naturally completed. But he remembered clearly that he and Weasel had made an equal exchange. He got the C4, and Weasel received the 3 commissions. This was what the two of them had agreed upon. Weasel felt his scalp tingle under Su Ling's gaze and couldn't help but shrink his neck. Don't look at me like that. I like women. Really. He made a retching expression and continued. You did the commission, you have to take the money. If you don't take it, that's an insult to my principles of how I conduct myself. Su Ling smiled and no longer procrastinated, putting the bank card into his pocket. Weasel and Wade are both the same type of person, sharp-tongued but soft-hearted. When it comes to rules and loyalty, they will not be vague. Moreover, in America, besides breathing, everything costs money. Having more money is always a good thing. All right, I'll take it then. Next time, I'll buy you a drink. Just as he was about to get up and leave, Su Ling suddenly stopped. Because he felt that if he rashly expanded his social circle, wouldn't he be like a headless fly, bumping around aimlessly? To approach rare creatures like superheroes, the most stable method is still through commissions. After all, didn't he meet the Punisher, Frank, through a commission back then? Perhaps after taking a few more jobs, he could meet other heroes, or even future Avengers members. Thinking this, Su Ling sat back down on the stool and said to Weasel. Are there any high-paying commissions recently? Give me a few. Huh. A big question mark appeared on Weasel's face. $10,000 isn't enough for you. Are you that short on money? Su Ling smiled noncommittally. Weasel pondered for a moment and said. There are high-paying commissions, but they're all outside of New York. Do you want to go? Without even thinking, Su Ling decisively shook his head and refused. His time was extremely precious now, he couldn't possibly use the rabbit talisman to travel. He didn't want to be invited for tea by those shield guys. After being rejected, Weasel lowered his head and rummaged loudly through the cabinet behind the bar. After about half a minute, he said. The highest paying one I have here is your own. But the good news is, the bounty on you has dropped. Oh. Su Ling raised an eyebrow, signaling him to continue. Although it's still an S-rank bounty, it has dropped from $15 million to $10 million. Su Ling was somewhat surprised. Could it be that the mastermind was short on cash? He asked. Why is that? This time, Weasel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a clear photo from another drawer and placed it in front of Su Ling. I think it's because of this. Su Ling looked down and saw that the strong man in the photo, tied to a chair with thick iron chains and covered in blood, was none other than the Punisher, Frank, with whom he had fought alongside before. At this moment, Frank had blood at the corners of his mouth, and his whole being clearly showed he had endured hellish torture. Weasel adjusted his glasses. News from the dark web. The Punisher has been captured. So the market generally believes that news of you, this, you know who, will eventually leak out. He pointed to the photo, his tone rather helpless. Everyone thinks you're about to be exposed, so the price naturally declines. At this point, Weasel couldn't help but glance at Frank in the photo again, continuing to educate Su Ling. This is clearly a gang tactic. Anyone caught by the gang, their fate is usually quite terrible. If it gets too bad, you can move in with Wade. Although that guy is several times scarier than the gang, at least he won't torture you. Well, I mean physically. Su Ling didn't respond to Weasel's teasing words, he just stared at the photo. To be honest, he had a pretty good impression of Frank. A man who upholds justice in his own way, now tortured like this. For some reason, a surge of emotion suddenly welled up in Su Ling's chest. This had nothing to do with missions or plunder points. It was just pure and undisguised displeasure. Tapping his fingertips lightly on the tabletop, Su Ling asked. Can you help me get information on the guys who captured Frank? Weasel's mouth twitched. He was all too familiar with that tone. Hesitating for half a second, Weasel still pulled out the old laptop from the cabinet and typed rapidly on the keyboard. A few seconds later, he looked up and turned the screen towards Su Ling. Found it. This photo was released by the Russian mafia. Weasel scratched his head. Are you sure you want to do this? This bait is too obvious, brother. It's almost like they wrote, "Come walk into our trap," below the photo. Su Ling put the photo in his pocket and said with a smile. You're right. It's too obvious, which is exactly why I have to go. Bang. The mercenary bar's door was kicked open. Weasel's fur bristled instantly. You fool. Why did you kick the door again? I've already fixed it for the third time. Clearly, the man who never opened doors properly and only used violence to kick them open was none other than Wade. Su Ling was also stunned. It had been almost 3 days since he and Francis fought, and this was the first time he had seen Wade. Knowing Wade's habits, he must have been engaged in high-intensity duo growth training with Vanessa. Perhaps even multiple, intensive day and night training sessions. Wade plopped down next to Su Ling with a thud, tilted his head back, and shouted. Weasel, give me some missions. I'm out of money. Su Ling looked at the listless Wade, somewhat disbelieving, and asked. You're short on money. Is that true? Of course it's true. Wade nodded his head like a garlic masher. If this keeps up, I'll become a kept man. In fact, Wade wasn't exaggerating at all. In his early years as a mercenary, he had so much savings that he could buy an entire row of liquor cabinets in a bar just for decoration. But later, a series of strange things began to happen. Not to mention, he had been immersed in finding Francis recently. The matter of taking commissions to earn money had long been thrown to the back of Wade's mind. Thinking of the balance in Vanessa's bank card, Wade twitched all over, spread his hands, and shouted. I don't care about black cards or gold cards. As long as it makes money, I'll take it. He paused, as if remembering something, and immediately added. But I'm only free during the day. Su Ling. Weasel. The air in the entire bar froze for a few seconds because of that sentence. Wade thought they hadn't reacted, so he explained seriously. I have to accompany Vanessa at night. Staring at Wade's miserable appearance, a thought suddenly flashed through Su Ling's mind, so he spoke. Wade, I have a big job here, want to consider it? Whoosh. Wade, who had been slumped in his chair, suddenly straightened up, his eyes as bright as two high beams. How big? Is it $10,000? No. Su Ling extended a finger and wiggled it in front of him a few times. It's infinitely big. New York, Queens. On an inconspicuous street, a slightly luxurious three-story villa stood quietly in the night. Its exterior walls were white, and the lawn was neatly trimmed. If not for the black jeeps parked all around, it would look like an ordinary wealthy residence. Rumble. Engine sounds broke the silence. Several SUVs simultaneously stopped in front of the villa. Doors flung open, and one after another, Russian burly men filed out. The leader was none other than the head of the Russian mafia, Kaylee. Footsteps sounded from outside the villa, and a black man quickly came forward to greet them. He barely stood steady before hastily saluting Kaylee. Boss, you're finally here, that guy is still. Kaylee raised his hand, directly cutting off his nonsense. Take me to him. The black man nodded and immediately turned to wave towards the inside of the villa. A few seconds later, with a creak, the villa's main door was pushed open from the inside. Led by the black youth, Kaylee walked through the villa's empty living room, then descended the stairs leading to the basement. After 3 flights of spiral stairs, they finally stopped in front of a large iron door. Although the door hadn't opened yet, there was a strong smell of blood in the air. Even Kaylee, a ruthless character who had killed dozens of people, couldn't help but twitch his nose twice. Open the door. Chains rattled, and then with a clang, the large door was pulled open. Dim light squeezed into the room. What came into view was an extremely small secret room. Unlike ordinary rooms, this one was clearly specially built. All 4 walls of the room were iron, and the ceiling had iron frames and chains. In the center of the room, a burly man was suspended in midair. Unlike the photos, Frank's hands and feet were now firmly bound by iron chains, his limbs spread out in an X shape. The chains dug into his flesh, blood dripped down his arms, and his chest barely rose and fell, almost imperceptibly. Kaylee entered the room with many Russian strongmen, staring at Frank and slowly saying, "Looks like he's still alive." During the time Su Ling and Francis were fighting head-on, the Russian gang was almost driven mad. They had been tracking the mysterious Asian man who killed Kaylee's younger brother, Thomas, but the clues had completely vanished. So they started looking for other avenues and set their sights on Frank. As outsiders, the Russian mafia wasn't afraid of this guy. Therefore, to capture Frank, they expended resources unimaginable to outsiders. But in the end, the Russian mafia finally relied on numerical superiority to drag the Punisher out of a sea of blood, and then subjected him to dozens of hours of torture. Electric shocks, impalement, saltwater irrigation, they used every method of torture they could think of, but Frank remained silent. Kaylee raised his hand. The black youth immediately walked to the iron device on one side and pressed a button. Click. The iron chains on the ceiling began to loosen, and the winch slowly descended. Frank's half-dead body, beaten to within an inch of his life, was pulled down from midair. Kaylee stepped forward, standing 2 paces in front of him, and asked, "Don't hold out any longer. Just tell me the whereabouts of that Asian man, and you can leave immediately. I can even share some of the bounty money from the underground black market and the dark web with you." Tens of millions of dollars in dividends. An ordinary person hearing such conditions would probably already be kowtowing in gratitude. But Frank was no ordinary person, he was the Punisher. A man who had nothing left to lose after the death of his wife and children. Money. Freedom. To him, these were meaningless. Frank slowly raised his head and said in a weak, hoarse voice, "When that fool Thomas died, he didn't suffer at all. Why don't you go join him?" Bang! Rage surged in Kaylee's heart, and he directly punched Frank in the face. The force of that punch was so great that the chains rattled. Frank's head was knocked sideways, and blood mixed with ruptured wounds splattered out. Kaylee grabbed his blood-stained collar and roared, "I'm losing my patience, Frank. If you don't speak today, I'll send you to hell immediately." PFF'd. A mouthful of bloody spit landed precisely on Kaylee's face. Frank's lips curved into an arc. As a man who had repeatedly danced on the edge of death, this level of torture was nothing to him. As for Su Ling's whereabouts. On one hand, Frank indeed didn't know his specific address, only that the kid lived in the western part of Manhattan. On the other hand, his relationship with Su Ling was quite good, After all, they had faced life and death together, once. However, compared to these, what Frank wanted to see more was the enraged look of these fools. Cayley wiped the blood from his face, raised his leg, and delivered a heavy kick directly to Frank's ribs. Feeling it wasn't enough to vent his anger, he followed up with several more punches, repeatedly smashing Frank's face, all while roaring. Speak. How long are you going to hold out? After venting, Cayley looked at the dying Frank and gestured. Give me the gun. But strangely, no one stepped forward to hand him a gun. Cayley's hand remained in midair for a full 2 seconds. His brows furrowed deeper, and he was about to turn and curse. Before the words left his mouth, he heard a pfft sound. That was the sound of a blade cutting through flesh. Cayley felt a sudden heat on his back, as if someone had poured a bucket of boiling liquid down his spine. Blood. It was definitely blood. The fishy smell exploded in the air, making his nasal cavity numb. He instinctively turned his head, only to find a gleaming blade already pressed against his throat. Cayley swore it was no more than 3 centimeters away from him. Even if he breathed a little too quickly, his neck would hit the blade. Gulp. A sound involuntarily escaped Cayley's throat. The helmsman of the Russian mafia, who had run rampant in the underground world for many years, instinctively swallowed at the terrifying scene before him. Cruel, too cruel. His elite subordinates, those battle-hardened, ruthless individuals who lived on the edge of a knife, were all lying in pools of blood. Chunks of flesh were scattered everywhere, like they had been run through a meat grinder, no longer resembling humans. Even more terrifying, he hadn't heard a single sound throughout the entire process. It was as if these people had been directly erased from existence. Cayley struggled to raise his head, his gaze slowly moving up along the blade at his throat. What came into view was a man in a red and black tight-fitting battle suit, with a hood over his head. Cayley's brain raced, frantically searching through all the factions he had offended. But he couldn't remember when he had provoked such a terrifying entity. This was something no human could possibly do. Cayley gritted his teeth, barely suppressing the tremor in his voice, and spoke. If you're after money, I can give it to you right now. Oh, how much money can you give me? Wade's lips curled into a playful smirk. But just this short sentence ignited a glimmer of hope in Cayley's heart. The fact that the other party asked for money meant he still had a chance to survive. Any amount of money. Our Russian mafia is never short of money. Just name your price. I'm serious, any amount will do. To appear more sincere, Cayley even tried to straighten his chest, even though his legs were trembling like he was tap dancing. We can even hire you to be our chief assassin. Swish. Deadpool sheathed his titanium alloy longsword behind his back. He tilted his head slightly, looking in a certain direction behind him, and said in that annoying voice. Oh dear, my good brother, the price he's offering is so tempting. What do you say? Can you up the ante? Footsteps came from the shadow. Su Ling slowly walked out of the darkness. He glanced at Wade and said faintly. It seems I need to tell Vanessa about you and Weasel having some kind of party. Before his words even fell, Wade, who had been standing in front of Cayley, suddenly pounced on Su Ling's leg like lightning, hugging it like a lifeline and shaking it frantically. No, brother. I was drunk. I wasn't willing. I'm really not that kind of casual person you think. Su Ling's face was full of black lines, and just as he was about to kick Wade, this leg-hugging weirdo, away, Cayley's furious roar suddenly reached his ears. Go to hell. Driven by his will to survive, this Russian giant, as big as a small mountain, rolled forward and quickly reached into the pool of blood. Bang! The pistol that had fallen to the ground was tightly gripped in Cayley's hand. Bang bang bang. Bullets sprayed like rain, and the muzzle fire erupted in a series of bright flashes in the small room. Cayley's finger was on the trigger, firing frantically. The pistol's magazine was emptied almost instantly. He gasped for breath, his face contorted by madness and fear. Ha ha, ha ha ha. 2 idiots, still chatting idly in front of me. Cayley was very confident. Because at such close range, even God would be riddled with holes. But, when he looked forward again through the smoke from the gun muzzle, he froze completely. The face that had been ecstatic with certainty just moments ago turned to stone in less than half a second. Not far away, Su Ling still stood upright, and the strange hooded man was still hugging Su Ling's leg. The two still maintained their previous posture, and they were still chatting. The most terrifying thing was that not even a corner of their clothes had been grazed by a bullet. Kaylee's entire face turned pale as if all the blood had been drained, and only one thought screamed in his brain. Impossible, impossible. At such close range, how could they be unharmed? Su Ling slowly raised his head, and with a thought, his mind moved. The surrounding shadows began to writhe and squirm as if by magic. The next second, dense Shotokan leapt out from the shadows in the corners of the walls, instantly filling the entire space. The bullets Kaylee had just fired lay quietly at the ninja's feet. Without a doubt, the Russian strongman's desperate strike was like a street trick in the eyes of the Shotokan, utterly insignificant. Su Ling grabbed Wade by the back of his collar and flung the leg-hugging weirdo aside like trash. Get up, we still have work to do. Falling face first onto the ground in a perfect dog-eating shit pose, Wade mumbled some unknown dirty words. You have to promise me you won't tell Vanessa. Watching Su Ling walk through the corridor formed by the shadow ninjas towards the person hanging on the iron chains, Wade got up, patted his butt, and squatted beside Kaylee. Frank's blood-crusted eyelids fluttered, and he barely opened a slit. When the familiar Asian face appeared in his sight, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of bloody teeth. You kid, what trick are you playing now? Or did you fly in? Clang. The chains were cut by a shadow ninja's blade, and Frank's limb restraints disappeared. The Punisher, losing his support, fell, but Su Ling reached out in advance, caught him, and then placed him on a chair. Frank grunted as he sat down, looked up at the gang members chopped into pieces in the distance, and then at the silently standing ninjas. Although full of questions, he still teased. Your setup is getting more and more twisted. Su Ling shrugged, not denying it. Then, he reached out and placed his palm on Frank's shoulder. Buzz. A soft white light emanated from Su Ling's palm. Frank felt his whole body lighten, and his body, which had been tortured to its limit these past few days, instantly returned to its original state. He instinctively shook his arms, making a few click-clack sounds. A rare look of shock appeared on his face, which had been covered in scabs just moments ago. What happened? But before he could voice the question, Su Ling had already walked straight towards Kaylee, who was slumped on the ground. Wade squatted beside him, tapping the Russian strongman's head with the hilt of his titanium alloy twin blades like he was knocking on a watermelon. I think this guy's scared silly. Why not just kill him? It'd be much simpler. Su Ling shook his head. Not yet, I have something important to ask him. Gurgle. The shadow at his feet trembled, and a shadow ninja appeared beside Kaylee. Then, the ninja violently plunged the kunai in his hand into Kaylee's thigh. Ah! The pain instantly sobered Kaylee, finally pulling him back from his dazed state of fear. No! Don't kill me. I surrender, I surrender. Su Ling stood before him, then slowly bent down, locking his gaze with Kaylee's terrified, bloodshot eyes, and asked. Tell me. What exactly is in that box? Kaylee's breathing suddenly hitched. His face twitched, and his eyeballs rolled upwards repeatedly. The intense pain from the kunai almost made him faint, but the thought of facing torment worse than death if he dared to conceal anything further kept him awake. Box. Su Ling frowned, speaking with some displeasure. Do I need to help you recall again? Kaylee shook his head rapidly, almost creating afterimages. Although he didn't know if the box Su Ling mentioned was the same one he was thinking of, he had no other choice now. He'd just say whatever he could. I'll tell you. Inside the box is a biochemical weapon. Thomas bought it from those Italians, but it was through the dark web, so we don't know the exact seller. Su Ling raised an eyebrow. Biochemical weapon. That was a novel term. Keep talking. What were you going to use it for? And what does it do? We plan to use it against Kingpin. America is a fat piece of meat that one person can't eat forever. As for its effect, Kaylee gritted his teeth, thought for a moment, and continued. The seller said it could easily poison a large number of people, but whether it works or not, I really don't know, because the box is gone. Originally, for that transaction, I had Claft, one of Thomas's subordinates, take it to the secret base, and then I would pick it up myself, but it was intercepted. I heard it was by some Asian person. Gah. The entire sentence was abruptly cut short. Kaylee's eyes widened sharply, his pupils uncontrollably constricting. He stiffly raised his head and looked at Su Ling. A young Asian man, incredibly powerful, connected to the Punisher. All the clues, in his rapidly working but not so bright pig brain, finally connected into a line. Wait a minute. You are. Kaylee looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He subconsciously glanced at Frank not far away. A deadly cold smile hung on that weathered face, as if to say, "That's right, the person you're looking for is right in front of you." Su Ling snapped his fingers. Several shadow ninjas leapt out, one of them holding the red metal box with both hands. After taking it, Su Ling looked at Kaylee and said, "Tell me the password." Kaylee tremblingly recited a string of numbers. Su Ling followed his count, entering the numbers one by one. With a soft click, the heavy clasps automatically sprang open. Inside the box lay a transparent glass bottle. The green liquid inside the bottle was wriggling irregularly, looking particularly creepy. Wade poked his head over and said, "Why does it look a bit disgusting?" Saying that, he reached out to pick it up and examine it closely. But Su Ling was faster, flipping his wrist and closing the box lid. "What are you doing? I haven't even picked it up to look." Su Ling ignored him, casually tossing the red metal box. A shadow ninja immediately glided out of the shadows, caught it steadily, and then silently retreated back into the darkness. The atmosphere in the entire room instantly fell silent. Su Ling slightly tilted his head, looking at Frank, who had just steadied himself and was stretching his shoulders. At the same time, he tapped his arm with his fingertips, completely immersed in a state of brainstorming. Based on all the Marvel-related information he had seen back on Blue Star, the only thing that matched this irregularly wriggling liquid was the Marvel Zombies universe branch. And one important universal storyline was the cannibal virus. This virus would cause infected individuals to choose to devour uninfected humans in order to obtain food. Just like the zombies in Resident Evil. In that timeline, the Punisher, while tracking a gang, engaged in combat with a group of criminals during an operation. The item they were trading was precisely the biochemical weapon in the test tube. During the firefight, the test tube was shattered, and the green liquid seeped into the underground water network. The virus spread at an incredible rate. The first to suffer was the famous Spider-Man, Peter Parker. As more and more humans were devoured, the number of infected grew exponentially, and even some Avengers personnel were later infected. The superheroes' abilities did not disappear, instead, they became even more out of control under the influence of the virus. It's no exaggeration to say that it was a disaster capable of collapsing an entire universe from its foundations. According to the memories in his mind, Frank was also splashed by the liquid, but surprisingly, he didn't mutate. Watching the entire city being devoured by the virus, the Punisher in that parallel universe ultimately made a decision only he would make, to end the disaster himself. In that universe's story, Frank, with his unique antibodies and his ruthless resolve of, "I'll drag you all down with me even if I die," single-handedly began hunting down the entire city of cannibals. Like those cliched yet heroic stories, Frank ended the cannibal crisis in that parallel universe, fulfilling his mission. But the problem was, this thing now appeared in New York, and he had, by a twist of fate, become a comrade in arms with Frank. Su Ling couldn't help but shiver. All of this was too coincidental, wasn't it? If he had, out of curiosity, forced the box open back then would it mean that the entire New York would turn into a disaster movie because of Su Ling's curiosity? Doesn't that mean I accidentally saved this world? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy Su Ling felt. This wasn't a simple coincidence. If the world he had transmigrated to was just a regular Marvel universe, then none of this could be explained. Su Ling's heart pounded heavily. He was increasingly convinced that his current location was likely not any single universe setting, but a great dive vat, where all worldviews were mixed together. If he hadn't been able to truly confirm this before, now, Su Ling had at least raised this confidence level to 50%. This meant that any power, organization, or enemy that had ever appeared in any Marvel work could potentially be randomly shuffled and integrated into this world. This is truly ridiculous. Should I ask Frank if he wants to become my disciple later? The thought of that disciple recruitment mission made his face ache. His thoughts returned. Su Ling gave Wade a look, then said to Frank, "Let's go, we should leave here first." Wade, having received the order, immediately perked up, a smirk even more villainous than a gangster's appearing under his mask. I understand. The moment the two stepped out of the room and onto the stairs, Kaylee's pig-like wails suddenly echoed from inside the room. Immediately after, came Wade's familiar tone. "Where's your money? Where is it, exactly? Tell me, and I guarantee you'll die. No, you'll live a little more comfortably." Wow, there's even a card here. Let me see if the password is a birthday. Hehe, not right. Then it must be your brother's birthday. Let me try. Oh, it failed again. Then I guess we have to continue. Clearly, when it came to tormenting people, Wade was streets ahead of Su Ling. 10 minutes later. Outside the villa, Su Ling and Frank waited for Wade's return. Taking several deep breaths of fresh air, Frank asked Su Ling beside him. "Although I have many questions, right now I just want to ask, when are we leaving?" "No rush." Su Ling smiled, looking up at the magnificent building, and slowly said, "Don't you want to see what fireworks made from a villa look like?" Hearing Su Ling's words, Frank subconsciously turned his head, his gaze falling on the Asian teenager beside him, who had a smile on his lips. He frowned, silently pondering in his heart. It had been exactly 2 weeks since the two of them last parted ways. But why were this kid's methods becoming increasingly perverse, and the palpable killing intent emanating from him made even an old soldier like him feel a bit unfathomable. Just as he was about to ask something, Wade's voice came from behind them. The guy sprang out of the bushes like a spring, his titanium alloy dual sword strapped to his back, but the eyes on his mask had a hint of sparks. "Su Ling, can't you let your group of ninjas handle dismantling the surveillance cameras? Do you know how many loops I had to go through to finish it?" Su Ling chuckled and said, "You've worked hard, Wade. How much did Kaylee cough up?" Wade knew this was a forced change of topic. But as soon as money was mentioned, the white eyes on his mask immediately lit up like two small suns. Hey, the Russian mafia truly lives up to its name as a big gang, they have a lot of money. A full, $3 million. Su Ling didn't speak, just quietly watched him. Wade shivered all over and quickly added, "Ahem, I misspoke, it's 5 million. Su Ling was still staring at him. Wade, who was feeling goosebumps all over, could even clearly feel cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Why is this guy's oppressive aura so strong? Alright, it's 10 million. I swear I'm not lying to you. Oh, 10 million. Su Ling pretended to ponder for a moment. But I remember the bounty on me on the dark web is 30 million. I'll tell you, alright. It's a total of 47 million. I really didn't hide anything. Really. If you don't believe me, I'll turn my pants inside out for you to see right now." The conversation between the two was naturally heard clearly by Frank. There was no particular emotional fluctuation on his face. As someone who faced death daily, money, as Jack Ma said, was probably just a number to him. And Wade. The guy had already grabbed his waistband, ready to begin his utterly absurd method of proof. Seeing this, Su Ling quickly waved his hand to stop him. Stop. I don't want to see your flamboyant pink underwear with Vanessa's name on it. Wade lifted his head, with a sense of deja vu of having defeated evil, and quietly pulled his waistband back up. Have Weasel launder this money, we'll split it 50-50. Hearing this, Wade almost started dancing with joy. Going from being so poor his girlfriend had to support him to instantly becoming a multi-millionaire, that feeling couldn't be described in a few words. Brother. I love you to death. From now on, you're the most important person to me besides Vanessa. What if I have a son or daughter? And Vanessa's family. Hold it. Su Ling slapped Wade on the head. Are you sure all the surveillance cameras are dismantled? Of course. Wade gave a thumbs up behind him. There aren't many cameras around here, I finished it quickly. But seriously, why did you want me to dismantle this thing? What's there to guard against with a piece of junk? Su Ling pointed at the excessively luxurious villa in front of them. Understand destroying evidence. Do you want those guys in suits and sunglasses to come knocking on our door? Wade nodded vigorously, indicating strong agreement. Understood, understood, I hate those guys too. Wait, then you made me dismantle the cameras, doesn't that mean I've already been exposed? Su Ling shrugged. Aren't you wearing a mask? That still doesn't. Stop talking, step back. Wade, interrupted, shrunk his head, muttering unknown words, and walked alongside Frank to Su Ling's rear. After stopping, he nudged the big guy next to him with his shoulder. Hey, what do you think Su Ling will do? Use those weird ninjas to dismantle the bricks on the wall one by one. What the hell? His scream was particularly piercing in the dark night. Because in Su Ling's hand in the distance, a pulsating light was rapidly gathering at a speed imperceptible to the naked eye. In almost the blink of an eye, it transformed into a sphere of light resembling a miniature sun. Frank's mouth also dropped open uncontrollably. What the hell is this thing? He had only seen such a scene in war movies, resembling a nuclear bomb explosion. Could Su Ling actually conjure a nuclear bomb by hand? Before the thought even fully formed, Frank saw Su Ling raise his hand, pointing his palm at the villa. In the dazzling white light, a crimson dragon head pattern flashed by. The next second, boom! A pillar of fire, 3 meters in diameter, erupted. The crimson pillar of fire directly hit the exterior wall of the villa. Bricks were vaporized, metal railings melted into molten iron, the entire building, under the terrifying power of the dragon talisman, completely vanished in less than a breath's time. Only a completely carbonized, shiny black ground, baked by high temperatures, remained. Su Ling slowly retracted his palm and flexed his wrist. Then he looked up at the empty space in front of him and nodded with satisfaction. The power of the dragon talisman was far easier to control than he had imagined. It didn't require complex thoughts, intricate techniques, or even charging up, like a superhuman. It was as simple as bending down to tie a shoelace. As soon as his mind moved, the power flowed out smoothly. Su Ling knew very well that the dragon talisman was the highest output ability among the 12 talismans. If not controlled properly, just the released pillar of flame could blow up half a street. Su Ling, being cautious by nature, considered many things. Although this power belonged to him, he still needed to confirm if he could fully control it. Therefore, after Wade said he had dismantled all the cameras, he secretly sent his Shotokan to clear out the remaining Russian mafia remnants in the vicinity. All the groundwork was for this test. Although it might not completely fool some detection methods, every bit of obstruction helped. Doing something was always better than doing nothing. As for retaliation from the Russian mafia, Su Ling felt it was unlikely. Unlike the Skull Society, Kaylee had brought almost all of his core members. It was no exaggeration to say that by the time the sun rose the next day, the Russian mafia would cease to exist in this world. Later, I'll call Weasel and have him spread the news of Kaylee's death. Those enemies will naturally clean up Kaylee's remaining forces for me. His thoughts returned, Su Ling turned around, and waved to the two still completely petrified figures in the distance. I'm leaving first, I'm covered in blood, I need to go back and take a shower. Without waiting for their reply, Su Ling vanished from the spot with a whoosh. Only Wade and Frank were left, disoriented in the dark night. A full 10 seconds later, Wade was the first to raise his hand, pointing in the direction where Su Ling had disappeared. Big guy, don't you think it's especially? He paused. Asshole of that kid to melt the villa into chocolate and then leave us here. My name is Frank. Frank nodded, a rare occurrence. And, I agree with you. Queens, being the largest of New York's 5 boroughs, is not exactly quiet at night. The metallic clang of cars driving over manholes in the distance, coupled with the constant stream of curses echoing from the alleys, added a certain vitality to the area. Su Ling hung up the Weasel's call, tucked his phone into his shoulder bag, and ambled leisurely down the street. Although he walked slowly, the thoughts in his head never ceased. The progress on this mission hasn't moved at all. Although rescuing Frank only took one night, the entire process encountered no obstacles. But the mission issued by the system felt like a sharp sword hanging over his head, making Su Ling feel terribly stressed. The other thing giving him a headache was that bottle of green, wriggling biochemical liquid. Su Ling couldn't help but rub his temples. How should he deal with this thing? If worst comes to worst. Pour it down the throat of some utterly wicked fool, and then heal him with the horse talisman. The horse talisman has the power to heal everything, so there is a high probability it would nullify the virus. Of course, the poor soul who drinks the virus might suffer a torment 100 times worse than being hacked to pieces. That is indeed a bit cruel. But it seems like a viable idea. Just then, Su Ling's nose was suddenly filled with a fragrant smell. It was the familiar scent of hot cooking oil mixed with the aroma of sauces. Oh, good luck. I actually found a Chinese restaurant. Before him was an inconspicuous storefront. Red neon lights flashed the large characters, Sichuan cuisine. Recently, Su Ling's life had been non-stop, like a perpetual motion machine. The food he ate was usually fast food bought randomly on the street. In America, a place with huge wealth disparity, cheap and good fast food is the first choice for the lower class. But similarly, this kind of food can cause rapid weight gain. Su Ling didn't mind high-calorie food, but changing the flavor occasionally was a different kind of happiness. Thinking this, he pushed the door open and entered. Before he could steady himself, a waiter immediately approached. How many, sir? 1. The waiter looked slightly troubled. I apologize, sir, but all the single tables are currently occupied. Would you mind sharing a table? Su Ling nodded, indicating his agreement. It's just eating, anywhere works. Making a, please follow me, gesture, the waiter led Su Ling toward a corner of the restaurant. The corner was quieter, the lighting wasn't bright, but the atmosphere was decent. By the window, a young man was looking down at documents in his hand, next to a plate of fried rice with one bite left. Su Ling only needed a brief glance to label him a science geek. It wasn't his stereotypical thinking, it was just that this young white man was simply too typical. Slightly messy hair, wearing a simple hoodie, he exuded the aura of a college student. The waiter whispered, "Sir, it's here." Su Ling nodded and sat down directly across from the young man. Taking the menu handed to him by the waiter, he casually ordered 2 main dishes that looked good. Kung Pao chicken, Yongzhou fried rice, plus a bowl of egg drop soup. The waiter noted the order and turned to leave. The restaurant environment was ordinary, but it inexplicably made people feel relaxed. It made Su Ling feel an impulse to open a Chinese restaurant himself. Su Ling picked up his water cup and took a sip. Just as he was preparing to fully enjoy his dinner, the young man opposite suddenly looked up sharply, as if he had received an electric shock. His pupils contracted rapidly, as though he had been struck by some immense shock. This slight change naturally did not escape Su Ling's eyes. But he felt a bit confused. He hadn't done anything strange, so why was the guy so terrified? He glanced at the notebook on the young man's table. The cover had an English name written on it. Peter the 20th. The latter part was obscured by the young man's hand, making it impossible to read clearly. However, the name, Peter, is quite common in New York, so it was nothing unusual. Su Ling was about to pick up his water cup again when the young man suddenly jumped to his feet. The chair scraped backward with a screech. The young man's face was pale, his breathing rapid, and the expression of fear plus panic was completely unconcealable. He frantically grabbed his personal items from the table, nearly dropping his backpack, and then fled the Chinese restaurant as if running for his life. Customers coming and going in the restaurant were startled, thinking there had been a fight. Su Ling. He held his cup, silent for 3 seconds. Was I too handsome? Did I scare the kid away with my looks? After teasing himself, Su Ling shook his head with a smile. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind like an electric current. New York, Queens. Peter, science geek, college student. He abruptly looked up in the direction where the young man had vanished. Wait a minute, could that kid possibly be Peter Parker? I'm Peter Parker, and I'm freaking out right now. Ever since attending that science exhibition and getting bitten by a spider that flew in from who knows where, Peter felt like something was wrong with his entire body. His chest felt tight, a buzzing sound grew louder in his ears, and his vision became increasingly clear. After returning home, he searched through every piece of information he could find. Radioactive spiders, genetic mutation, clearly, none of this could answer the confusion in Peter's heart. So, before the library closed, he rushed there and consulted a large volume of materials. But the changes in his body wouldn't wait for Peter. While looking through the materials, Peter noticed his fingers were becoming increasingly nimble. This was quickly followed by changes in his hearing, smell, and reaction speed. By nightfall, Peter couldn't stand it anymore, so he went to a Chinese restaurant he frequented, hoping a good meal would calm him down. Just as he was about to finish eating, Peter realized that the world around him had suddenly become quiet. All sounds seemed instantly amplified to maximum volume. Immediately afterward, the hairs all over his body stood on end simultaneously, as if struck by an electric current. Danger. Extreme danger. Peter felt his heart rate was about to spike above 200. He looked up, and what met his eyes was the expressionless face of the Asian man sitting across from him. There was no thought, only pure instinct driving his body. Peter grabbed his backpack and bolted out of the Chinese restaurant as if he were being hunted. He didn't know how long he ran for. Maybe 100 meters, maybe 1,000 meters. In an alley, Peter leaned against the wall, gasping for air. What's going on? What exactly is the deal with that man? After several deep breaths, Peter finally managed to calm down a little. The burning sensation in his chest, which felt like it was being inflated by a bellows, finally eased slightly. But just then, buzz. Peter involuntarily shuddered. A voice, clearer than clear, sounded from behind him. Spider sense, is it? A decent ability. Who is there? Peter's voice trembled severely, but his legs refused to move. Footsteps emerged from the shadows. Su Ling, wearing a slight, enigmatic smile, stood under the dim light at the alley entrance. It looks like you just got bitten by a spider. Don't be afraid. I'm not a bad guy. Under the street lamp, Su Ling's shadow stretched long. Peter tried to steady himself, but his palms, pressed against the wall, were completely soaked with cold sweat. The feeling of his hair standing on end and his heart pounding uncontrollably hadn't subsided, instead, it grew clearer. Spider sense. Peter repeated it in his mind, completely unsure what it was. But he could feel that the sense of crisis, which made his whole body tense, was not an illusion. He looked up at Su Ling, who was slowly walking towards him. The other person's pace was slow, no different from an ordinary adult. But the more so, the clearer it was to Peter. If this man really wanted to do something, he wouldn't be able to escape. After a moment of struggle, Peter finally gave up the urge to run, tried to calm his rapidly pounding heart, then mustered his courage and said with a trembling voice. What do you want? Tap. Su Ling finally stopped. He looked at the tense young man in front of him, smiled, and took half a step back. Don't be nervous, I told you I'm not a bad person. Spider sense. It was one of Spider-Man's most iconic abilities, providing a strong intuitive warning before danger struck. Although he seemed to be doing nothing right now, the reality was that he had just blown an entire Russian mafia villa to dust. Not to mention, he currently carried the aura of the horse talisman, rabbit talisman, and Shotokan. Any one of these powers could make spider sense go wild. So Su Ling could completely understand Peter's current state. To an ordinary college student who had just gained abilities and hadn't even figured out the mutation, he probably seemed like a nuclear warhead ready to explode at any moment. Su Ling tried to soften his tone. My name is Su Ling. You're Peter Parker, right? Peter was visibly startled, but still nodded gently. Perhaps it was Su Ling's deliberate step back, creating distance, or perhaps his non-threatening, almost gentle tone, but Peter's breathing finally became less erratic. Su Ling continued. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Can you answer me seriously? Peter blinked, then nodded again. Today you went to a science exhibition about radiology, and there you were bitten by a spider, right? Peter froze completely. His brain short-circuited at that moment, sparking. Bitten by a spider, exhibition, radiology, all hit the mark. He couldn't help but look up at Su Ling, and an absurd thought flashed through his mind. Could this Asian man be God? But soon, Parker quickly swallowed the thought, only nodding obediently. Yes, that's right. Mr. Su Ling, you are correct. Su Ling nodded with satisfaction, then put his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on Peter. Very good. So, would you consider becoming my apprentice? Peter. The next morning. Mercenary bar. Weasel was wiping a glass at the bar, secretly glancing at Su Ling, who sat silently opposite him. This guy was currently engrossed in drinking a sugar-free cola. Yes, that kind of state where he was so conflicted he didn't know whether to drink alcohol or water, eventually compromising with sugar-free cola. Weasel felt a wave of confusion. Is this heartbreak? Impossible. Su Ling's face was fair and clean, the kind of person who could debut immediately after washing his hair. How could he be troubled by love? Is it a lack of money? That's even more impossible. Although only 10 million of the Russian mafia's money had been laundered, after deducting various handling fees, there were still a few million left. If he were so worried about too much money in his card that he had to drink sugar-free cola, then Weasel himself would probably just smash his own head with a chair. The more he thought about it, the more something felt off. Weasel frowned and asked, "Brother, did you encounter anything?" Weasel. Su Ling suddenly spoke, cutting him off. He slowly looked up, his gaze so complex it seemed to question his entire life. Do I look like a pervert? Weasel. This question came too suddenly, too directly to the soul. What on earth happened? Who was so unlucky to scare this big boss? Which idiot dared to call him a pervert? After 3 seconds of thought, Weasel cleared his throat. What aspect are you referring to? If it's the efficiency of completing commissions, then yes, it's quite perverted. If it's in daily life, only Wade can be called a pervert. After a pause, Weasel added. Tell me, what happened? Su Ling hesitated for a few seconds, then finally sighed deeply and shook his head. Never mind, I won't talk about it. He finished the sugar-free cola in his glass in one gulp, and Peter's last words automatically replayed in his mind for the 8th time. Sorry, Mr. Su Ling, I suddenly remembered I have something to do. I have to go now. After throwing out that sentence, Peter scurried away along the wall, faster than Wade could drop his pants. The more Su Ling thought about it, the more he felt wronged. Did I just get taken for a pervert? I just asked if he wanted to be my apprentice, how did that equate to being a pervert? He was clearly just trying to complete a mission. Upon learning that Peter had just been bitten by a spider, Su Ling admitted, he was really excited. After all, that was Spider-Man. The popular friendly neighborhood teenager in the Marvel Universe, one of the ceiling-level existences among superheroes. The current Peter was clearly in his initial budding stage. Spider-Man in this state was like a low-level character grinding quests all over the map. If you taught him even a little something, his combat power would immediately increase significantly. Even teaching him the correct posture for web slinging could be judged by the system as significant growth. Such a living, self-leveling experience baby, brought before him to take as an apprentice, how could Su Ling not be excited? Just thinking about it made Su Ling feel incredibly thrilled. Mission complete, plunder points credited. Having a superhero apprentice, it's incredibly prestigious. He can even call Spider-Man for backup in future fights. This was practically a godsend. But he forgot one thing, or rather, a very crucial reality. In America, there were too many perverts. Nowadays, if you randomly stopped a student on the street and stared at them saying, "Would you consider being my apprentice?" It would be strange if you weren't misunderstood. Shaking his head, Su Ling swept away the gloom of being rejected yesterday. He looked up at Weasel behind the bar and said, Weasel. Buy me a house in Forest Hills, Queens. Weasel's efficiency was as astonishing as ever. In a place like America, money is omnipotent. Even at 3 in the morning, if you knock on a door holding a wad of cash, you can make a real estate agent jump out of bed to hand you a contract. Accompanied by a screeching brake sound, Su Ling jumped out of the passenger seat, slammed the door shut, and looked up at the new house he had just acquired. A 3-story building, an independent yard, white wooden window frames, a typical New York style, full of U.S. flavor. However, Su Ling's gaze didn't linger on his own house for too long, it moved directly to the house next door. That was Peter Parker's home. He could even see Peter's mailbox, the lawn by the door, and that rickety old car often mocked as falling apart if you drive it. Su Ling's mind was already rapidly formulating a plan. Get close to Peter, win his trust, find an opportunity to help, complete the mission. As long as he controlled the pace, the system mission was guaranteed. If I weren't afraid the system would misjudge, I'd really want to bag that kid, tie him up, take him home, and force him to become my disciple. Su Ling even seriously considered whether he should have Wade play a supervillain to create a fated opportunity for Peter. Write a script, arrange a plot, and incidentally create some master-disciple destiny. While complaining internally, he stepped forward, preparing to walk toward his new home. Just then, a woman's scream came from the direction of a nearby alley. I clearly bought this. You can't do this. Su Ling paused his steps, instinctively turned his head, and looked toward the source of the sound. Inside the alley, a charming middle-aged woman was in a standoff with a young black man. Both were tightly clutching a large bag of supermarket groceries, neither willing to let go. This woman, why does she look familiar? As doubt arose in his heart, Su Ling quickly walked toward the alley. As he got closer, that familiar face finally became clearly visible. May Parker. The most important woman in Peter Parker's life, bar none. The young black man seemed to hear Su Ling's footsteps, glanced back. Realizing he might have been caught, he became enraged and shouted. You fool! Let go of it. In America, this kind of $0 shopping, shoplifting, looting is already the norm. Especially women who walk alone become the perfect targets. But facing such a threat, May not only didn't back down, but seemed completely enraged, tightening her grip even more. I bought this. You won't take it away. If you need money, you should work hard, not engage in this disgusting behavior here. The young black man, whose sore spot had been hit, turned cold. You asked for this. He pulled a pistol from his waist and pressed the muzzle directly against May's forehead. Die. Facing the sudden, drastic change, May's pupils contracted in fear. Just as she felt utterly hopeless and her mind went blank. Snap. The young black man in front of her vanished into thin air. This sudden change left May stunned where she stood. Her hands were still tightly gripping the grocery bag, and she subconsciously looked around. What happened? Deeper inside the alley, an Asian teenager was single-handedly hoisting a struggling figure. The gun had fallen from the young black man's hand. He was now being held by the collar with one hand, like a chick being lifted, his feet off the ground and completely unable to resist. Su Ling showed a trace of disgust, then violently exerted force with his right hand, slamming the young black man into the ground like a piece of trash. Thud. The violent impact made the guy instantly lose consciousness, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Silence returned to the alley. May stared blankly at the scene before her, opening her mouth but unable to utter a sound. Only after several seconds did she quickly run forward, patting her chest while looking at Su Ling with eyes full of gratitude. Sir, thank you, truly thank you so much. Su Ling clapped his hands and said with a smile. It's nothing, just a small favor. May's heart was still racing, but she noticed the direction Su Ling had come from, which seemed to be the location next to her house, so she spoke. My name is May Parker. I heard from community services that an Asian person would be moving in next door. Are you the new tenant? Su Ling nodded, showing his harmless neighbor smile without reservation. I am Su Ling. You are correct. It seems we will be neighbors from now on. May sighed in relief, a gentle smile appearing on her face, just as she was about to say something. Da. Urgent footsteps came from the alley entrance, and a tall, thin teenager carrying a backpack shouted before he could even catch his breath. Aunt May. His voice abruptly cut off. Because his eyes immediately registered three things. The young black man unconscious like a dead dog, the pistol dropped on the ground, and the Asian teenager standing next to his Aunt May. The impulsivity unique to teenagers instantly erupted. What are you doing to Aunt May? The roar echoed in the narrow alley. Peter, with his backpack still on, pushed off the ground and charged out like a cheetah. Su Ling. This kid, is he seriously taking me for the villain? May quickly reached out, trying to stop him. Peter. It's not like that. This gentleman. But before she could finish. Swoosh. Su Ling's figure vanished like a ghost. When he reappeared, he was already standing behind Peter. Peter was still holding his charging posture, and Su Ling simply raised his hand and pressed down casually. Plop. Peter's legs instantly gave out, and he dropped to his knees with a thwack. Mr. Su, this is a misunderstanding. May rushed forward, but Su Ling ignored her completely, looking down at the future superhero and slowly saying. With your current ability. His gaze swept over the unconscious robber on the ground, the scattered pistol, and then returned to Peter's shocked eyes. If your Aunt May encounters danger again next time, can you truly protect her? Su Ling didn't say another word. He simply gave May a gentle smile, then waved his hand. See you next time, Ms. May. In the wide alley, all that remained were Peter kneeling on the ground, May too shocked to speak, and the young black man being slowly dragged into the shadows by the Shotokan. After returning to the house, Su Ling plopped down onto the living room sofa. The soft cushion sank, and he raised his hand, placing his phone against his ear. Yeah, Weasel, I've moved in. What? I don't want a stripper, Wade, you idiot. Neighbors. Yeah, quite enthusiastic. Weasel muttered a few things on his end, interspersed with suspicious phrases like, you didn't cause trouble, did you? Su Ling couldn't be bothered to explain, only responding briefly. Hanging up the phone, he tossed it casually onto the coffee table. Rubbing his temples, Su Ling felt that the events of today were more concentrated than those of the past several days combined. But every single thing seemed to be reminding him. You cannot delay, you must make a decision quickly. Leaning back against the sofa, Su Ling stared up at the ceiling. If Peter was willing to follow him, that would naturally be the perfect outcome. Spider-Man not only has huge potential and fast growth speed, but also possesses astonishing combat adaptability. But, what if he wasn't willing? Then I won't force it. Su Ling knew clearly that the system mission required significant growth, not forced transaction. Furthermore, judging by Peter's reaction just now, that kid's fear level toward him was practically maxed out, and the difficulty of converting him in a short period was definitely high. However, Su Ling was never the type to put all his eggs in one basket. 3 days. If you still avoid me within 3 days, then I will immediately give up on you and look for the next superhero who is more willing to grow. Before the thought even settled, a knock suddenly came from the door. Su Ling said somewhat impatiently. I don't need any solicitations, thank you. Immediately after he spoke, a nervous, ashamed, yet extremely serious voice emerged from outside the door. It's me, Peter. Mr. Su Ling, I am very sorry. The air instantly became frighteningly quiet. Su Ling even wondered if he was hallucinating. That unlucky kid he had just forced to his knees. The kid who had activated his max-level spider sense against him and run faster than a rabbit, actually came knocking on his door the very second after he decided, if he doesn't cooperate, I'll find a new disciple. Su Ling slowly stepped forward, gripped the doorknob, and pulled gently. Creak. When the door opened, the sight that greeted him was Peter Parker, head bowed and shoulders trembling slightly. Although he tried hard to keep his forehead low, looking as if he were checking the floor for cracks, his reddened eyes still clearly fell into Su Ling's view. Su Ling was not God, nor was he a mind reader. But as a transmigrator, he knew very well. The only person who could cause such a huge emotional fluctuation in Peter was the beautiful woman, May Parker. I'm sorry. Mr. Su Ling. I apologize for everything I did. Please forgive me. Just as Su Ling expected. Aunt May accounted for at least half the reason Peter suddenly came to apologize. After Su Ling left the alley, Aunt May didn't immediately take Peter home. Instead, suppressing her emotions, she scolded him right there on the street. Peter, you were too reckless today. That gentleman risked his life to save me. You must go apologize. Do you hear me? Otherwise, I won't forgive you. For a teenager who had undergone drastic mutation and whose emotions were already in turmoil, this scolding caught him completely off guard. What's more, before Peter was bitten by the spider, he was essentially an introverted, shy, socially awkward nerd. This was precisely the fundamental reason he was subjected to long-term school bullying in the original work. The more this kind of personality, the easier it is to blame oneself. That's why, after being scolded by his closest relative, Aunt May, Peter Parker was now standing at Su Ling's door with red eyes. Su Ling sighed, then reached out and patted his shoulder. Raise your head, Peter. Everyone makes mistakes, it's normal. But face your mistakes like a man. In the spacious living room, after chatting briefly with Su Ling, Peter's extremely tense shoulders finally relaxed slightly. More wonderfully, the suffocating feeling he had experienced earlier in the alley had completely vanished. It was as if Su Ling opposite him was no longer the dangerous creature that could explode at any moment, but a kind neighbor. Drink some water. Su Ling handed over a bottle of mineral water. Thank you. Sitting down on the chair opposite, Su Ling crossed his hands and stared at him, asking. So, since you were bitten by the spider, you haven't done anything yet. Just looking up information. Peter softly hummed in affirmation. Yes, Mr. Su Ling. I wanted to figure out what happened first, but there seems to be very little information about this. Su Ling was silent for 3 seconds. If you could find anything about this, I'd be fooled. He's become Spider-Man, yet he's still stuck in the library. What the hell? Suppressing the urge to rub his forehead, Su Ling continued. All right, Peter. Regarding your changes, I can give you the answer. But before that, I need you to think carefully. Su Ling leaned back against the sofa. Do you think you can control your power? Or rather, now that you have abilities, will you act like that black youth earlier and engage in zero-yuan shopping? Peter remained silent. Su Ling's words had struck a chord with him. Growing up in America, he had heard the stories of Captain America countless times. Peter had also glimpsed some news about mutants from hacker circles. But Peter, the student, treated all of that as mere entertainment to pass the time after meals. But now, things were different. After being bitten by the spider, the changes in his body were real. Compared to that unknown power, Peter was actually more afraid that he would turn into some kind of non-human existence. What if I turn into a monster? What if I actually hurt Aunt May and Uncle Ben? These miscellaneous thoughts constantly swirled in Peter's mind. Taking a deep breath, he finally raised his head. Mr. Su Ling, I understand. He stood up quickly from the sofa and looked at Su Ling. Besides the apology just now, I also hope you can take me as your disciple. And please teach me how to use this power. I want to become as strong as you. The moment his voice fell, the air seemed to stop. Peter Parker, who had treated Su Ling as a pervert yesterday and fled before finishing his sentence. Now, however, he mustered all his courage to utter such a speech, which was almost Shunobue-esque. The speed of this turnaround was almost worthy of being registered as a World Heritage Site. But Peter showed no intention of backing down. In these 2 days, which had been as chaotic as a roller coaster ride, the only person who made him feel reliable and who even vaguely showed him a direction for the future, was this Asian youth before him. Peter was so nervous that the tips of his ears were red, but he stubbornly kept his head raised, afraid of missing any of Su Ling's expressions. Su Ling quietly watched the trembling youth who was desperately trying to be brave, and a curve lifted the corner of his mouth. Of course, Peter. Welcome aboard. And don't call me Mr. Su anymore. Just call me Shifu. Su Ling, now in high spirits, wished he could start Peter's devil training immediately and quickly complete the mission. But before the thought could settle, the air in front of Su Ling began to rapidly distort. Accompanied by a buzzing sound, a massive virtual box appeared. Ding. Side quest triggered. Quest name. Changing your disciple's future is also changing yourself. Quest content. Ensure Peter Parker's family survives within the next 7 days, 2 halves. Quest reward. Shengju's demonic power, absorption magic. Note. Failure of the side quest will affect the main quest. Su Ling's pupils instantly contracted, and the sudden notification made his scalp tingle. A side quest. Failure will affect the main quest. What the hell is going on? But Su Ling didn't have time to complain about the suddenly popping up quest. He quickly calmed himself down and looked down at the time on his phone, exactly 3 p.m. In other words, until 3 p.m. 7 days later, he had to use every possible means to ensure May Parker and Ben Parker survived safely. Wouldn't it be enough to just have the Shotokan surround the house? This quest isn't that hard. Wait, it couldn't be that simple. Su Ling suddenly raised his head and asked anxiously. Peter. Quickly tell me, where are Aunt May and Uncle Ben right now? Peter was confused, but he immediately replied. Aunt May is home, she should be preparing dinner now. As for Uncle Ben, he went out not long ago to withdraw some cash this afternoon. Su Ling's heart skipped a beat. Spider-Man's timeline has already started. In the original work, the death of Ben Parker was actually somewhat related to Peter. If he hadn't let that criminal go, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. But the current situation is completely different. As soon as he accepted a disciple, the side quest immediately triggered. Then Ben Parker also, just happened, to go out to withdraw money, and don't forget, the black youth who was, $0 shopping, earlier had held a pistol to May's head. Everything, absolutely everything, was unfolding before Su Ling like a script. Su Ling knew clearly that he could no longer trust any original timeline. All the plots he thought he was familiar with were shifting due to his appearance. This is definitely not a coincidence. All sorts of possibilities flashed wildly through his mind. Could the appearance of me, a transmigrator, have triggered some kind of chain reaction? But no matter what it was, one thing he was 100% certain of. If he didn't intervene now, Ben Parker would most likely die on the road. And the side quest had clearly warned. Failure will affect the main quest. Su Ling never forgot that the main quest was to accept a disciple and ensure their significant growth. The first half of that was already complete. If Ben Parker's death occurred normally, Peter might enter a state of extreme trauma. If that happened, this main quest would be stuck for even longer. Thinking this, Su Ling's mind stirred. The shadows around him began to bubble and surge. Swish swish swish. In the blink of an eye, the previously quiet living room was instantly filled with human figures. Countless shadow ninjas appeared before Peter's eyes as if by magic. Peter's mouth formed a huge O shape. This. What kind of movie-level horror scene is this? Su Ling glanced at Peter and spoke. Peter. Ah, huh. Su Ling pointed to the ninjas. They will protect Aunt May. Now tell me immediately, which direction did Uncle Ben go? Peter struggled to pull his gaze away from the murderous ninjas, his Adam's apple bobbing several times before he spoke. Casena Boulevard. Uncle Ben often goes to the bank over there. Good, you come over immediately later. Swoosh. Before his voice had completely faded, Su Ling's figure vanished from the house, leaving behind a room full of shadow ninjas who uniformly turned their heads to stare at Peter. At this moment, Peter finally understood the reason for the hair-raising chill and rapid breathing he had felt earlier. His master was truly terrifyingly powerful. Casena Boulevard is the most bustling heart of Queens. People hurried along both sides of the street, and sounds of smashing and cursing continuously drifted from the distant alleyways. This was one of New York's most typical sights. Creak. A slightly old car stopped by the roadside. The car door opened, and a figure squeezed out of the vehicle. His hair was graying, and his expression was weary, yet he exuded a gentle but stubborn demeanor. Ben Parker lifted the shopping bag in his hand. May told me it wasn't a good day to go out, but if I don't withdraw money, how can we entertain our new neighbor? After all, he risked his life to save May. After muttering a few words to himself, Ben Parker habitually checked the car door, ensuring it was locked before walking forward. In the shadow behind him, a black thread within a crack gently wriggled. Ben Parker suddenly stopped, his sixth sense compelling him to look back instinctively. Strange, why do I feel like someone is watching me? However, he quickly rubbed his brow and continued walking with a smile. Sigh, looks like I'm really getting old. There's no such thing as the supernatural, I'm just overthinking things. However, this brief 1-second pause caused Ben Parker to overlook the increasingly close, yet extremely unnatural, sound of footsteps ahead. Bang! The sound of metal crashing came from the entrance of a convenience store in the distance. Immediately after, a man in a gray-green jacket stumbled out of the store. He kept his head down, his breathing erratic. Even though his eyes were full of terror, he fiercely protected the money he had just stolen, clutching it tightly to his chest. There was another crashing sound. A man who was clearly a store clerk rushed out of the convenience store, stumbling to the street side and shouting, "Robbery! Someone's robbing the place." However, upon hearing this, the passers-by on the street did not immediately try to stop him. Instead, they quickly moved aside, actively clearing the path. The robber in the gray-green jacket glanced up, and seeing no one blocking him, the panic in his eyes was replaced by a hint of wild joy. Haha, almost there, just a few more steps. But just as he was about to rush into the narrow alley ahead and completely escape everyone's sight, his ankle suddenly seemed to trip over something. The robber, losing his balance, rolled 3 times on the ground, and the banknotes in his pocket scattered everywhere. He finally stopped, and just as the robber rolled over from the ground, before he could assess the situation, he was pinned down by a force. I've got him restrained. Someone, hurry. Ben Parker. This gray-haired old man, without the slightest hesitation, threw himself onto the robber's back, pressing down hard on the man's shoulders with both hands. But no matter how hard he tried, he was just an ordinary old man. The robber, however, was a desperado fighting for survival on the edge of death. Die, you old fool. The robber roared and twisted his body, easily breaking free from Ben Parker's restraint. He rolled to his feet, his hand quickly reaching for his waist. The muzzle instantly lifted, pointing directly at Ben Parker's chest. Bang! Because the distance was too short, Ben Parker had no time to dodge and instinctively raised his arm. However, 3 seconds passed, and the pain of a bullet piercing his chest never materialized. He lowered his hand and saw a splatter of blood blooming on the young man standing in front of him. The bullet that should have hit his chest was now firmly embedded in the left arm of the person before him. Su Ling glanced at Ben Parker, and his heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled. Fortunately, his Shadow Legion was effective and quickly located Ben Parker. If they had been even a second later, everything would have been ruined. The horse talisman doesn't have the power to resurrect people. Mr. Ben, are you alright? Su Ling's tone seemed casual. But on his left arm, blood was dripping down the cuff, hitting the ground with a distinct pattering sound. The stark contrast left Ben Parker completely stunned. You're hurt. Shaking his head with a smile, Su Ling said. It's nothing, Mr. Ben. As long as you're safe. After confirming that Ben Parker was fine, Su Ling finally turned around, his gaze locking onto the gunman ahead who was completely terrified. Just as Su Ling prepared to deal with the guy, a shadow flew in from the right with a swoosh. A sneaker solidly kicked the robber in the face. The force was so great that several of the robber's teeth flew out. He instinctively tried to bend down to pick up the pistol, but the gun was kicked away and slid into a distant drain. Peter, his eyes full of rage, didn't care about anything else. He lunged forward and pinned the guy to the ground. His arm locked around the neck, his knee pressed against the man's back. The movements were so textbook, as if he had trained for them. You despicable fool. How dare you harm my master? Su Ling. Ben Parker. Peter. Is that Peter? That ferocious kick, that incredibly practiced restraining move. Was this still his nephew Peter, who was usually timid and avoided crowds when people were arguing? Su Ling lightly coughed twice and said, Ahem. With great power comes great responsibility. Tell me, Mr. Ben, am I right? The robber was suppressed by Peter, and the situation stabilized. Since this minor character no longer posed a threat, Su Ling didn't continue to act. More importantly, he could tell that this proactive attack had a significant impact on Peter's mindset. This was growth, and also a transformation. However, the prompt sound in his ear did not ring. Su Ling wasn't surprised, he didn't want the prompt sound to appear at this time either. Subduing a street robber. To the system, that was at most a minor farce level event. If that counted as completing the mission, then triggering the reward doubling mechanism would be a pipe dream. Su Ling stepped forward, slapped the struggling robber unconscious, and then looked at Peter, saying, All right, let him go. Your master isn't so fragile that he needs you to go berserk and save him. Peter then came back to his senses and quickly released the robber. As soon as he stood up, his gaze inadvertently swept over, and a question mark instantly popped up in his head. Su Ling's arm, which had been shot, now had completely closed skin, without even a trace of blood. Even more terrifying, the bullet dropped to the ground at his feet with a pat sound. It was as if some force had forcibly squeezed it out of his body. Master, you're just too. He originally wanted to say, too abnormal, but he swallowed it back at the last moment and changed it to too amazing. How is this even human? This is more Captain America than Captain America. He's simply the ceiling of superheroes. While Peter's stream of consciousness was running wild, his eyes sparkled with an unprecedented light. It was an emotion mixed with worship and awe. Su Ling looked at Peter's star-struck eyes, smiled, patted him, and said, Let's go, leave this to the police. Night fell. The outskirts of Queens. A massive estate, exaggerated in size and almost absurdly luxurious, stood silently here. If the Russian mafia's villa could be considered a luxury residence in a prime location, then compared to this estate, it probably couldn't even buy one of its bathrooms. At this moment, in the study at the center of the estate, the air was heavy, like a layer of mist. The underground emperor, Kingpin, sat in a wide chair symbolizing power. In front of him, dozens of intelligence reports, surveillance photos, and samples collected from the scene were scattered on the table. His thick fingers continuously tapped the scepter, making a chilling, thump-thump sound. The demise of the Russian mafia was much faster than I anticipated. Kingpin looked up at Han, who was slightly bowing in front of him. Have their businesses all been successfully acquired? Yes, Mr. Kingpin. Han's lips curled into a smile as he added. The Russian mafia, having lost Kaylee, is now leaderless. It only took us 3 days to completely devour their entire industry chain, but Kaylee's deposits, for some reason, have vanished. My suggestion is that we could hire some. Han, you seem to be slacking off a bit. Han, suddenly interrupted, paused, and even his breathing became somewhat uneven. Kingpin stood up and walked over to Han, a hint of disappointment flashing in his eyes. Is money that important? A casual remark, yet it instantly dropped the temperature in the study by 10 degrees. Han opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a single word. What I need to know is not where Kaylee's deposits went. He pressed his fingertips on the stack of photos on the table. Snap. The photos scattered, all sliding to Han's feet. What I need to know is who eliminated Kaylee. And that Asian man. Any results yet? Han trembled all over, he didn't even know when he had started sweating. Sweat beads rolled down his temples, and he immediately lowered his head and said, Kaylee's death, we are still investigating. As for that Asian man, named Su Ling, we've already found his residence. Hearing this, Kingpin's tense face finally relaxed a little. Kingpin had initially posted a bounty on Su Ling under the name of the Russian mafia on the dark web. Now that the entire organization had been uprooted, that bounty naturally became a completely worthless piece of paper. Although he wasn't clear about the connection between the two, Kingpin vaguely felt that this Asian youth held many secrets he had yet to uncover. So, he looked up and asked, have you made contact with this Su Ling? I'm sorry, no. Han shook his head. According to current intelligence, Su Ling is a mutant, and one whose speed is difficult to observe. Acting rashly might alert him. Upon hearing this, Kingpin not only wasn't angry but instead showed a faint, ambiguous smile. Very good. It's rare that you still know to be wary. He raised the scepter in his hand and tapped the ground a few times, thump thump thump. In that case, then let the hand take action. The hand. Han suddenly looked up. Mr. Kingpin, a mutant, surely doesn't warrant disturbing them. The hand. It was the most mysterious and terrifying organization within Kingpin's power structure. Rather than calling them assassins, it would be more accurate to call them gods of death born from the shadows. All members of the hand were ninjas. They were incredibly quiet when executing missions and would disappear silently after completing them. Even if killed, their bodies would dissipate into black smoke within tens of seconds. Not only that, some members were mutants. For example, Lady Bullseye, Typhoid Mary, and others, each a top-tier killing machine. Kingpin waved his hand, his tone clearly showing impatience. Resolve this matter as quickly as possible. Also, it's time to teach that Frank a lesson. Han's body trembled, and he immediately bowed in response. Understood, Mr. Kingpin. Then, without delaying for half a second, he turned and quickly left the room. The moment the door closed, the vast room plunged back into a deathly silence. Kingpin looked at the night outside the estate. No one knew what he was thinking. His fingertips caressed the cold crystal ball at the top of his scepter, and a meaningful smile appeared on his face. Whether it's turmoil or mutants. As long as they're in New York, they will eventually fall into my hands. 3 days passed in a flash. Compared to the chaotic days before, these 3 days were eerily quiet. Even the minor conflicts in the nearby streets had significantly decreased. Su Ling, who had previously been operating at an accelerated pace, found this sudden calm slightly unsettling. However, he had to admit that these 3 days were extremely valuable. Although the mission temporarily tied him to this area, it allowed him to quickly become familiar with Peter's family. Ben Parker and May Parker, the two elders, were unbelievably enthusiastic toward Su Ling, their savior. May cooked him delicious meals every day, changing the menu constantly, while Ben frequently tried to drag Su Ling out for coffee and life lessons. Su Ling almost thought he had fostered a sense of dependence in the two elderly people. Of course, the main focus remained on Peter. During these 3 days, Peter Parker's growth rate was astonishing. To ensure this provisional superhero grew strong, Su Ling did not dump all the Spider-Man plot details he knew onto him. Instead, he chose to guide him little by little, allowing Peter to figure things out for himself. Sometimes Su Ling even wondered, was he being overly cautious? But it was precisely this near-paranoid caution that allowed Peter to display astonishing adaptability in using his mutated powers. Power control, reaction speed, web shooting, wall crawling techniques. Under Su Ling's systematic training and subtle hints, he mastered these abilities at a speed that felt like cheating. Sometimes Su Ling even had the illusion that this power hadn't appeared recently, but had been imprinted within Peter since the moment he was born. At this very moment, inside Su Ling's home. To provide Peter with a good training environment, Su Ling tore down all the partitions in the rooms on the second floor and gave the furniture to the homeless, turning the space into a small training room. In the center, a ninja from the Shotokan, having received Su Ling's order, violently threw the kunai in his hand. The next second, Peter, standing opposite, instinctively flicked his wrist, and a web accurately intercepted the kunai in midair, pinning it firmly to the wall. Training like this had been repeated countless times, it no longer posed a challenge to him. On the sofa, Wade rested his legs on the coffee table, crossed his arms, and stared at the walls covered in webs, momentarily speechless. He cocked his head and addressed the expressionless Su Ling beside him, drawing out the end of his sentence in a strange tone. I say, bro. You've been totally out of contact for 3 days. Were you actually raising a monster at home? As a top mercenary, Wade could tell that the talent contained within this little guy named Peter was beyond description. The funniest part was that this teenager constantly hovered around his brother Su Ling, calling him, Master, with every breath. Su Ling glanced at him and spoke plainly. It's talent. I don't believe it. After speaking, Wade looked back at Peter. Peter, let me warn you, your master has never focused his attention on anyone this seriously. I seriously suspect you're his biological son. Peter. Su Ling raised his hand and smacked Wade's masked head. I called you over late at night. Did you think it was just to hear your dirty jokes? Wade clutched his head, completely shameless, and chuckled instead. I thought you wanted to hear how I defeated Vanessa. You know, I mean defeated in every sense. Ever since that day when he and Su Ling uprooted the entire Russian mafia. The massive deposit Kaylee confessed to before his death allowed Wade to completely escape the days of worrying over a few $100s. According to Weasel's description, this guy and Vanessa barely left their apartment. The content of those scenes was probably more exciting than an action movie. Sometimes Su Ling had to admire Wade's breathtaking thought process. Can the healing factor really be used for this kind of torture? He looked at Wade, who was still wearing his mask and making strange gestures. I called you over to ask for a favor. Su Ling pointed to Peter, who was standing solemnly nearby, like an elementary school student waiting for homework to be assigned. Use your combat experience to teach Peter. Huh, me teaching this kid? Yes, you are going to teach him. As soon as the words landed, the eyes on Wade's mask instantly stretched into a straight line, clearly indicating he was struggling to load his intelligence. Me, teach him. Is it the kind I'm thinking of? As Wade spoke, he made an up and down sliding gesture with his right hand. Isn't this something boys are born knowing how to do? Doesn't he know how to beat his? Ow. Wade, having been smacked again, held his head. Seeing Su Ling's gaze, which was practically spitting fire, he quickly corrected himself. Why so serious? I was just joking. It's just practical combat experience, right? I'll teach him. Su Ling glared fiercely at Wade, then looked toward Peter opposite them. For these 3 days, he had been training Peter almost constantly. It could be said that the kid had entered a mode where he was ready to fight the moment his eyes opened. But even so, the mechanical voice in his ear still showed no signs of indicating, mission complete. Su Ling really wanted to step in himself, but unfortunately, his abilities were clearly unsuitable. Or rather, they were too overpowered. The horse talisman is primarily for support, useful for saving people and healing, but seemingly useless for Peter's growth. The rabbit talisman represents extreme speed. If anything, it could only make Peter's reaction speed slightly faster, and it wasn't a genuine fighting technique. And the most crucial dragon talisman, that thing has absurd power. If Su Ling loosened his restraints even slightly, the entire street would be destroyed. Use it to train Peter. That wouldn't be training, that would be murder. With the 3 talismans excluded from the training regime, Su Ling was left with only the Shotokan. These ninjas are strong, but Peter can now easily avoid their kunai using his spider sense and super fast reactions. The webs stuck to the walls are the best proof. Unless Su Ling summoned dozens or hundreds of ninjas at once, like the day he rescued Frank, and had them gang up on Peter. But that wouldn't be training, that would be using his apprentice as a punching bag. Su Ling wasn't that cruel. Therefore, after much thought, a character like Wade, extremely rich in combat experience, brutally crude in style, and unkillable, was the most ideal, practical combat instructor. Wade jumped up from the sofa with a "Haisho" sound, smoothly drawing his titanium alloy dual blades from his back and crossing them over his chest. The white eye arcs on his mask instantly changed into a smirk. He approached Peter step by step, saying sinisterly, "Come on, little guy. I'm 100 times crueler than your master. If you're slow to react later." He suddenly clapped the dual blades together. "You'll be going home butt naked." The spider sense was ringing frantically. Peter knew very well that anyone who could be friends with his master couldn't be weak. He half crouched, turned sideways, and spread his arms. Spider-Man's familiar starting stance was ready. Wade grinned. "All right. That's the look." Just as the two were about to collide and wrestle. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Su Ling's phone, placed on the coffee table, suddenly vibrated. The familiar name appeared on the screen. Frank. Su Ling raised an eyebrow, then lifted his hand to stop the two. "Wait a moment, pause." As soon as he put the phone to his ear, before Su Ling could even say hello, Frank's voice came through the line. "Su, be careful. Someone is tracking you." Su Ling was stunned, before he could ask anything. Bang! The glass of the second-floor window was shattered by an external force. Broken glass scattered and flew, falling into the room. The next second, swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Several figures, dressed entirely in black, moving strangely, and unnaturally light on their feet, flipped through the second-floor window and appeared before Su Ling and the other two. Their attire was extremely similar to the Shotokan. But it was only the clothing. Because both their aura and killing intent were completely different. A giant question mark appeared over Wade's head. Motherfool. What's going on? Did your ninja subordinates start an internal feud? Just as Wade's complaint left his mouth, a whooshing sound of wind echoed from the broken window frame on the second floor. Another shadow leapt in. A second and a third followed closely behind. In just a few seconds, a full 15 black-clad, cold aura ninja assassins completely surrounded the second floor, leaving no escape. Just amidst the chaos, Frank's voice came through the phone again. "Su, listen up. It's those lunatics from the hand. They." Crack. A sound of cracking bone suddenly came through the phone, followed immediately by a thud, as if something had fallen to the ground. Evidently, Frank was also suffering the same attack. Wade's eyes instantly widened. Hey, hey, hey. Did the big guy just bite the dust? Don't talk nonsense, Frank is clearly fighting someone. Su Ling's expression darkened, and he continued speaking toward the phone. Frank, I'll send you the address later. Head over here. Hanging up the phone abruptly, Su Ling quickly swiped his finger across the screen to send his address to Frank before looking up. His gaze fell upon the black-clad ninjas who stood ramrod straight but were slow to launch an attack. The killing intent permeating the air was not frantic, yet it was chilling enough to crawl into one's bone marrow. Su Ling narrowed his eyes, quickly pondering internally. He had some impression of the Hand. They were a supervillain organization in the Marvel Universe, and the arch-nemesis of Daredevil. But here was the problem. I haven't even met Daredevil, so what the hell? Why are these ninjas looking for me? Meanwhile, Peter's breathing had unconsciously become rapid. No matter how rigorous the training of the past few days had been, it was still just training. But now, the newly debuted Spider-Man was facing a true enemy for the first time. Nervousness was inevitable. But just as his heart was pounding fast enough to jump out of his throat, Su Ling and Wade simultaneously stepped forward, shielding him behind them. In that instant, the panic in Peter's heart seemed to hit a pause button. He looked up and asked in a low voice. Master, what do we do now? Should we charge out? Su Ling did not answer immediately. His eyes seemed fixed on the black-clad ninjas, but his true attention had already spread out. These ninjas were clearly the vanguard of the Hand. The real danger lay with the mutant assassins behind them. Compared to this group of small fry, Ben Parker and May Parker in the next room were the ones he needed to constantly watch over. Su Ling hadn't forgotten the side quest. If anything happened to those two, not only would the mission fail, but Peter would also directly turn dark. With a thought, his consciousness delved deep into the shadow. None of the shadow ninjas he had specially arranged to lurk near Peter's house had died. That's good. Su Ling let out a breath, and his expression gradually relaxed. This was enough to show that the Hand had only one target, himself. Wade, take Peter and leave. Go protect his family in the next room. Upon hearing this, Wade immediately nodded. He clearly understood Su Ling's intentions. The current Peter was too green and not yet suitable for joining a frontal battle. As for protecting Peter's family next door, Deadpool was confident he could complete that mission. Slotting his titanium alloy twin blades back onto his back with a clack, Wade turned to look at Peter. Come here, Peter. Don't look like you're about to fight. Just come with me obediently. In Wade's view, Su Ling's decisions were always the type that straightened out every complex situation with a single sentence. He just needed to follow them, and he would never make a mistake. Single-handedly lifting Peter, Wade pushed off hard with both legs and leapt out the window to the right, not forgetting to shout. We're leaving, kiddo. Your master is about to start showing off. In the enormous room, the atmosphere was so oppressive it felt like water could be squeezed out of it. The ninja standing at the very front suddenly spoke, his voice carrying a stiff, deliberately learned accent. You are Su Ling. Su Ling's brows instantly furrowed into a single line. That broken Chinese, that strange tone, that familiar scent of cherry blossoms, he knew exactly where they came from without having to think. Su Ling couldn't be bothered with pleasantries and said coldly. Who sent you? Tell me, and I'll leave you a complete corpse. The leading ninja paused for half a second, then let out a cold laugh he clearly thought sounded imposing. Hey, you think we? He didn't finish his sentence. Su Ling raised his hand and uttered two words faintly. Won't talk. Then die. Leading ninja. Did I say I wouldn't talk? I hadn't even finished speaking. But he didn't even have time to pull the question mark out of his head. Because in the next second, the shadows in the room began to writhe and bubble. Dense, countless shadows surged forth from the corners. 1 second. No, not even half a second had passed. Before the 15 ninjas of the Hand could react, they were completely surrounded by the Shotokan summoned by Su Ling. The expressions of those Hand ninjas instantly changed drastically. This was the first time in their lives they had been crushed to the point of suffocation by the aura of their own kind. Before they could raise the short blades in Kusarigama in their hands, Su Ling waved a finger. Swoosh. The shadow ninjas rushed forward in droves without any unnecessary words. In an instant, the entire second floor erupted into chaos. The great melee of ninja vs ninja officially began. Blade light intertwined, shadows danced wildly, and footsteps exploded on the second floor like heavy drums. Every inch of shadow became a launch point for the Shotokan. However, the ninjas of the Hand were clearly not pushovers, they quickly counterattacked with astonishing agility and killing intent. The two sides became entangled, and sparks from the clash of cold weapons flashed continuously. As the old saying goes, 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. But the battle before them was more like 15 fists are no match for 40 hands. When 40 hands are chopped to pieces, 80 more appear. When 80 hands are mangled, 100 more leap out. The hand ninjas finally realized that these shadow-like monsters simply could not be killed completely. The shadow ninjas they stabbed through the chest stood up intact from the corner shadows in the next second, and those whose necks were severed could reform in the ground shadows. Not only was the enemy endless, but their fighting instincts were also precise and ruthless, showing no fear of death. Wait, they weren't even capable of dying. Under relentless pressure, the assassins of the hand found that even taking a single step forward, let alone getting close to Su Ling, became an extravagant hope. The battle lasted no more than 3 minutes. Out of the 15 elite assassins of the hand, only one remained. It was the leader who had previously spoken to Su Ling in broken Chinese. The rest had all fallen to the ground, mercilessly strangled by the Shotokan. Although their bodies mysteriously dissipated after death, a characteristic of the hand, the attacks of the shadow ninjas ensured they would not have a chance to rise again. Following Su Ling's signal, the Shotokan dragged the sole survivor over and pinned him down in front of Su Ling. The ninja was pressed down so hard his head was against the floor, his bones cracking painfully, yet he still struggled to look up and glare at Su Ling. Su Ling looked down at the stubborn assassin and slowly began to speak. Now, can we talk? Facing Su Ling's inquiry, the ninja remained silent. Members of the hand never crack under interrogation. Su Ling raised an eyebrow. Oh, quite the backbone. He raised his hand and flicked his finger. The nearby shadow ninja immediately understood, pulled out a kunai, and aimed it at the assassin's chrysanthemum. Feeling the cold intent approaching, his pupils involuntarily constricted. What the hell? This is dishonorable. If you can withstand this, I will deeply respect your willpower. But the consequences, you might not like them. Accompanying Su Ling's voice, the kunai in the shadow ninja's hand was already pressing against the cloth. Just as it was about to pierce him. Whoosh! A sound of air being torn came from outside the window. The next second, PFF'd. A long blade directly pierced the ninja's skull. The long blade entered through the left temple and exited through the right, finally embedding itself in the wall with a clang. Before the blood could even drip to the ground, the long blade whooshed back into the night, as if summoned by some force. But it wasn't over yet. 2 more piercing metallic sounds of breaking air rang out. Su Ling tapped his toes and instantly darted backward. The next second, 2 long blades embedded themselves into the wooden floor at the exact spot where he had been standing. One of the blades still carried fresh red bloodstains, clearly the one that had killed the hand ninja. An ability to control objects. Is it a mutant? This was expected. Swish. Su Ling instantly vanished from his spot. Rabbit Talisman, full power activation. Moving at a speed invisible to the naked eye, he instantly appeared near the corpses of the previous hand ninjas. Weapons and bodies were scattered across the floor. Bending down, Su Ling casually picked up a short blade, then vanished once again. When he reappeared, he was standing behind the 2 flying knives. His gaze hardened, he gripped the hilt of the short blade, and slashed down fiercely. The clash of short weapons erupted in blinding sparks. The 2 flying knives, which were attempting to return, shattered into dozens of pieces under Su Ling's attack, clattering onto the floor. Your weapon is still too weak compared to Wade's titanium alloy twin blades. Su Ling turned, looking out the window, and continued. Come out. You know very well that this thing can't hurt me. Accompanied by the click of sharp high heels on the wooden floor. A graceful figure dropped into the room from the windowsill. That wasn't teleportation just now. The woman's voice carried a chilling tone. It was Speed, wasn't it? Under the moonlight, her appearance finally came into Su Ling's view. A tight black battle suit, paired with flame-like red long hair, perfectly outlined the woman's waist and long legs. Romantic and dangerous. This was Su Ling's first impression of her. And the aura emanating from this woman was not on the same level as the hand ninjas from earlier. Su Ling pondered for a moment, feeling a bit clueless, and asked. Another person from the hand. The woman grinned. Sort of, but not entirely. It's more accurate to say we have a cooperative relationship. She stared at Su Ling, as if admiring a highly valuable treasure. A mutant who can summon shadows and use super high-speed movements to slice my flying knives. Truly rare. Su Ling frowned. He felt that this woman was strange, but couldn't quite place why. Just then, the woman across from him suddenly took a sharp step back, curling up entirely in the shadow of the corner. The previous murderous intent and composure were completely gone. You, don't come near me. What she uttered was not a fierce threat, but a whisper filled with fear and survival instinct. Su Ling could even see her hugging herself, her shoulders trembling continuously. What the hell is this maneuver? Is she putting on an act? Why are you suddenly going crazy? Hearing Su Ling's reprimand, the woman in the shadows trembled even harder. She hugged her head, her voice becoming weaker. I didn't come here to kill you. Please, don't let that demon come out. Mary, she is taking me over. Su Ling finally realized. This isn't just an ordinary hand assassin, this is Mary Alice Walker. A terrifying mutant with 4 personalities living inside her body. The one who just controlled the flying knives to sneak attack him was Typhoid Mary. The one currently curled up trembling in the corner is the weakest, Scaredy Mary. Besides that, there is a normal personality, and the most dangerous one, Bloody Mary. All the relevant information Su Ling remembered flashed wildly through his mind, and his expression instantly became extremely serious. This is bad. Once she switches to the 4th personality, she is a monster capable of creating spiritual energy shields and even unleashing destruction-level energy explosions. At this moment, the woman curled up in the shadows was in such pain that she was nearly tearing at her scalp. He couldn't let her lose control here. If Bloody Mary appeared, he and Wade would be fine, but Peter and his family next door might not be. Without hesitation, the rabbit talisman within Su Ling erupted. He instantly pounced on Mary, who was curled up in the shadows, hearing her suppressed, painful whimpers. Let me go, she's coming out, she's coming out. Let me go, she's coming out, she's coming out. Su Ling grabbed her with one hand, he had to get this person out of here. But just as he was about to activate the rabbit talisman and accelerate away, Mary suddenly fell silent. She was quiet, as if her power source had been disconnected. Su Ling's heart sank sharply. I was still one step too late. PFF'd. Blood sprayed from Su Ling's wrist. His right hand was cleanly severed, the cross-section of the bone as smooth as a mirror. Bloody Mary rolled a few times on the floor and then stood up. She slowly raised her head, a smile that was nearly demonic spreading across her lips. It was an utterly bizarre face. Her red hair fanned out in the night wind, and her entire being seemed reborn, soaked in fresh blood. She twisted her neck, then raised both hands, aiming them at Su Ling nearby. A little monster who can slice flying knives and summon shadows. Crimson energy wildly gathered in her palms, the light enveloping the entire 2nd floor. Let me kill you. Gulp. The power of the horse talisman activated, and Su Ling's severed wrist instantly recovered as if time had been reversed. A trace of surprise flashed in Bloody Mary's eyes. This guy, can his severed wrist instantly regenerate? Su Ling, however, ignored her shock. Because his biggest concern right now was Peter's family, who were protected in the adjacent building. He glanced sideways out the broken window. According to the message transmitted by the Shadow Ninjas, Wade was protecting Peter, Ben, and May. But with such close-range combat, it's too late to use the rabbit talisman to move them. Then I can only risk everything. Su Ling murmured softly, then raised his right hand. The next second, the aura of the dragon talisman surged out from within his body. The air vibrated, and the entire building began to tremble. Crimson energy climbed from his arm all the way to his palm. Su Ling stared at Bloody Mary and said coldly. You want to trade blows with me? Then give it a try. The power emitted by the dragon talisman spread out with a hum, centered on the building where Su Ling was located. Visible cracks appeared in the walls of the entire 3-story building. And it wasn't just where Su Ling was, Peter's building next door was also shaking. The floor hummed, and the light bulbs popped and burst. Inside the room, the sudden tremor made Wade stumble 2 steps, but he quickly stabilized himself, shielding Peter and the other 2 firmly behind him. His titanium alloy dual blades crossed into a capital X, and sweat streamed down Wade's forehead behind his mask. He looked up at the ceiling, which was creaking loudly from the vibration, and couldn't help but growl. Motherfooler. Su Ling. What the hell are you doing? Are you planning to blow up this entire street? Ben, who was behind him, hugged May tightly and said tremblingly. What happened? Was it an earthquake? Unlike the confusion of Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Peter's breathing became erratic, and the fear that exploded from his spine clearly indicated his spider sense was at work. If a normal danger was a beep beep, now it was an alarm blaring, woo woo. His face instantly turned pale, and his legs began to go soft. Peter, are you all right? May rushed forward to support him, but Peter didn't make any movement at all. He stared intently in the direction of the building next door, filled not only with fear but also deep shock. That level of combat was something only God could achieve. But this wasn't the most terrifying part. One must know, where Peter and the others were, was merely the vicinity of Su Ling. It wasn't an attack, nor the epicenter, just a little bit of residue, from dozens of meters away. Peter's mind buzzed, he suddenly felt a bit ridiculous. He had actually wanted to spar with Su Ling before. He had secretly been proud of his awakened power. He had even thought, I'm already a superhero. Now it seemed, he was simply too arrogant. Wade slightly turned his head, looking at the still shocked Peter, and waved his titanium alloy dual blades in front of him. Kid, pull yourself together. We need to get out of here quickly. Although he didn't know what was happening next door. But with such a huge commotion, Wade was certain that Su Ling must have encountered a mutant-level monster. Staying any longer would likely lead to being caught in the crossfire. Su Ling's mission for him to protect Peter's family had to be completed diligently. Boom! A tremor came from next door. Then, the originally pitch-black night seemed to be illuminated by something. May cried out in surprise, while Ben instinctively shielded her. Yes. I understand, Mr. Wade. Peter's words had not yet fallen. The next second, Wade's eyes suddenly widened, and he shouted at the top of his lungs. Get down! Before the words could even reach Peter's ears, he had already pounced like a bear. Peter, May, and Ben were instantly embraced by Wade and pressed to the ground. A crimson heatwave poured into the room from all directions almost simultaneously. It wasn't ordinary airflow, but more like a thermal shock from the depths of purgatory. To protect the three, Wade's back was directly facing the center of the explosion. Sizzle. A sound like a steak hitting a hot griddle rang in his ears. I don't want to eat steak right now. Wade even smelled his own flesh being scorched. His back was burning with pain. Large areas of skin cracked open, emitting charred smoke. Although his healing factor worked frantically, the recovery speed was far from catching up with the speed of the aftershocks burning. And while Peter and the other two were also suffocated by the surging heat. Because they were completely shielded by Wade's back and body, at least they weren't roasted into chive pancakes. Tears streaming down his face from the scorching air, Peter shouted. Mr. Wade, your back is smoking. I don't need you to remind me, stay still in my arms. Wade gritted his teeth. That fool Su Ling must treat me to 300 steaks to compensate me. Why is it steak again? The predicament Wade and the others faced was not intentionally caused by Su Ling. In fact, he had already been trying to control the explosive power emitted by the dragon talisman, keeping it as far away from Peter's side as possible. At this moment, at the center of the battle, Su Ling maintained the posture after firing the dragon talisman, with a scorching red glow still lingering in his palm. He slowly retracted his arm, facing an empty space. The three-story villa he had just purchased now only had one floor left under his feet. As for the madwoman Bloody Mary, it was as if she had never existed. Evidently, in this magic showdown, Su Ling achieved victory with overwhelming means. According to his memories, that madwoman Mary, besides being able to unleash destructive energy cannons, could also use telepathy to interfere with targets, create mental illusions, and control objects to float, among many other abilities. These skills, under the protection of the horse talisman, were indeed useless to Su Ling. But for Peter's family, they were deadly. If used on those two ordinary people, Aunt May and Uncle Ben might collapse on the spot and become puppets. Su Ling couldn't take the risk. That's why he could only choose to confront her head-on with the strongest firepower and had to end the battle in an extremely short time. The dragon talisman's explosion was to completely suppress Mary, giving her no chance to escape. But Su Ling didn't show a victorious smile. Instead, his brows furrowed slightly. He suddenly remembered a crucial point. Besides being a schizophrenic mutant, Mary actually had another identity. That was, during Kingpin's tenure as mayor of New York City, she became Kingpin's wife. At this moment, all the fragmented clues in Su Ling's mind were connected by an invisible force. The Hand. Mary. Russian Mafia. Su Ling quickly came to a conclusion. That fool Kingpin is targeting me. However, what truly made Su Ling's face turn completely cold was the thought that flashed through his mind afterward. As a Marvel dual cultivation practitioner, from Blue Star, having watched the movies and read the comics, he was too familiar with some key plot points. In the comics, May Parker's death was caused by Kingpin, who ordered a hitman to shoot her from prison. So now that the side quest suddenly triggered, with the content being, ensure the survival of Peter's family. Su Ling had every reason to suspect that the mastermind behind all of this might very well be Kingpin. Moreover, Kingpin was already one of Spider-Man's archenemies. So, from any perspective, getting rid of this big guy would be extremely beneficial for Su Ling. Thinking of this, Su Ling looked up, staring at the distant night, and murmured. Kingpin, huh. Let's see how I kill you. His thoughts returned. The head-on battle with Mary had completely destroyed the 3-story villa he had purchased at great cost, making it look as if a tank had rolled over it from the inside out. But Su Ling couldn't be bothered with such trivial matters. Dropping from a height, his figure turned into an afterimage, flashing directly to the doorway of Peter's house next door. The message from the Shadow Ninjas had already been relayed back to Su Ling's mind. Peter and his family are safe and sound. But Su Ling felt it was better to check in person. After all, the recent wave of magic bombardment had caused quite a commotion. He raised his hand and pushed open the door panel, which had been charred by the residual energy of the dragon talisman. The next second, Su Ling froze. Because the sight that greeted him was Wade's bare ass, covered in constantly squirming flesh and even smoking black. The scene was instantly quiet. Before Su Ling could speak, Wade suddenly turned around and started cursing him. Su Ling, you fool. Wade roared while covering his regenerating butt with his hands. Why the hell are you burning your own people? I was almost roasted alive, do you know that? Su Ling ignored his howling and glanced over at the sofa. May and Ben, both ordinary people, were pale but appeared unharmed, clearly just frightened. Peter, standing nearby, was constantly saying things to comfort the two of them. This scene allowed him to breathe a sigh of relief. Wade was indeed reliable this time. He had protected Peter's family fiercely, acting as a human shield. So Su Ling withdrew his gaze, a slightly apologetic smile appearing on his face. Sorry, we ran into an unexpected situation, but it's resolved now. Hearing this, Wade immediately rolled his eyes, then trudged toward the bathroom, muttering curses the whole way. I should have brought a change of clothes when I came. This fine ass of mine is exclusive to Vanessa, and now, great, you guys saw everything. I need to quickly grab a towel to cover it up. With a bang, the bathroom door was closed. Su Ling quickly walked up to Peter's family, his tone conveying clear apology. I am truly sorry for frightening you all. Ben Parker quickly waved his hand. Peter already told us, your house had a gas tank explosion, right? The community should be responsible for the repairs and compensation for this kind of thing. May also nodded hastily, her face full of worry for their savior. That's right, Su Ling, don't worry, we all saw the commotion. If investigators come, we will testify for you. You don't need to be afraid, just be safe. Su Ling was stunned for a moment, then immediately realized. Ben and May are ordinary people, telling them about a mutant war plus energy bombardment would only make things worse. Even Spider-Man's identity, they only found out much later in the original story. So Su Ling immediately put on a smile that couldn't be more natural. I'm fine, then I'll trouble the two of you when the time comes. May and Ben nodded simultaneously. In their view, it was perfectly normal for a young person to be frightened after a gas tank exploded inside their house. As for that strange guy with dual swords and a mask, he didn't seem so bad either. Su Ling silently praised Peter's ability to smooth things over. Truly worthy of being the future neighborhood good kid hero, his talent for trash talking was already beginning to show. Su Ling patted Peter's shoulder and gave him a look. Peter immediately understood. The two walked, one after the other, to another corner of the living room. After confirming that May and Ben couldn't hear, Su Ling lowered his voice and told Peter the situation in the shortest and most concise way possible. The Hand, mutants, Kingpin, the central theme was only one: strike first. Especially when Su Ling said, "Their target is me, but it might also affect Aunt May." In that instant, Su Ling clearly saw a fierce killing intent suddenly surge in Peter's eyes, which had previously looked rather student-like and even slightly naive. This made him raise an eyebrow slightly. Holy moly, this Spider-Man kid has such strong underlying ruthlessness. Before Su Ling could say anything else, Peter whispered, "Master, when are we going to take them out? This kid learned to jump the gun already." Wade, that guy, had finished washing up sometime earlier. He poked his head out of the bathroom, wearing only a bath towel wrapped around his waist. "Take out who? Bring me along." Su Ling rubbed his temples and said irritably. "Wade, May and Ben still need you to protect them. The two of us are enough." Wade immediately pouted in dissatisfaction, realizing this wasn't the time for nonsense, and reluctantly nodded. Fine, I'll stay. But you have to bring me back one of those fools. I want to stab his asshole." Just then, buzz, buzz, buzz. Su Ling's cell phone vibrated again. At this hour, no one else would be calling him except Frank. Answering the call, Frank's voice came through. "Sue, is there something wrong with the address you sent? That building, looks like someone blew it up." Su Ling was about to explain, but the red and black fool next to him, who could never learn to shut up, cut him off. "Su Ling blew that up himself. You big idiot." Wade shouted at the top of his lungs, looking smug as if he knew the inside scoop. Raising his hand, Su Ling grabbed Wade's head and twisted it aside, then put the phone back to his ear and said, "Frank, were you also attacked by those guys from the Hand? Did you run into any mutants?" There was silence on the other end for 2 seconds, followed by Frank's reply. "Yes, I was attacked. As for mutants, I think so, but I ran away." Su Ling couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Truly worthy of being the Punisher. "It's good that you're safe. Wait in the alley across the street according to the coordinates I sent. I'm coming over now." "All right." Frank's tone revealed a hint of exhaustion. It seemed this escape journey was not as simple as imagined. "I'll wait for you over there." Su Ling hung up the phone, and Wade crept up behind him again. "You're playing favorites, Su Ling. Taking the big guy to kill people but not me." Su Ling ignored him, just patted Peter's shoulder. "Let's go, we're going to pick up Frank." Peter simply told May and Ben that he was going to report to the community, and the two elders instructed them to be careful before watching them leave the house. A few minutes later, Su Ling and Peter walked into an alley across the street corner. As soon as they turned the corner, Peter was startled. Frank was squatting by the wall, covered in blood from head to toe. But upon closer inspection, they would realize that this big guy showed no signs of injury at all. Clearly, all the blood belonged to those guys from the Hand. Because Frank held no malice, Peter's spider sense naturally didn't activate. Frank looked up. The first person he saw was Su Ling. The second person he saw was Peter standing behind Su Ling. He stood up and asked with a frown, "Who is this kid? Your son?" "Peter." Su Ling. Su Ling slapped his forehead, looking at Frank with an expression that said, "Don't joke around. This is my apprentice, Peter Parker." Frank stared at Peter for a full 3 seconds, then asked in a tone of disbelief, "Are you sure he's not your son? He looks a bit like you, the Asian mixed race type." Peter, being teased, scratched his head and asked, Master, do we really look that much alike?" "Shut up, Peter." The three looked at each other for a second, and the atmosphere was inexplicably comical. Su Ling waved his hand. "All right, stop joking around. Frank, tell me about Kingpin. You should know more than I do." As expected of a man who had faced life and death alongside Su Ling. Hearing the question, Frank immediately understood what Su Ling truly intended to do in less than a second. He instinctively wanted to advise, "Don't be rash," but the thought was immediately quashed in his mind. This kid was never reckless. Since he intended to move against Kingpin, he must have prepared beforehand. Therefore, Frank pondered for a moment before speaking. "Kingpin, this guy is definitely more than just an underground emperor. As far as I know. As the Punisher, who has long operated in the underground society, Frank possessed intelligence that ordinary people could never access. Not to mention that Kingpin cooperates with most of the gangs in New York, a status that makes him virtually ubiquitous across the entire criminal chain. In a sense, Kingpin was also Frank's arch-enemy. That's about it. What else do you want to know? Frank finished speaking and leaned against the wall, subconsciously reaching into his pocket for a cigarette. But when his peripheral vision caught sight of Peter standing obediently beside Su Ling, he forcibly restrained the action. Su Ling did not respond immediately. He rested his chin on one hand, completely absorbed in the intelligence he had just received. The contents Frank mentioned almost perfectly matched his memories of the Marvel storyline. For instance, Kingpin's empire collapsed after getting involved with Hydra, only for him to make a comeback later in the Cherry Blossom country using terrifying methods. It was precisely because of this that he could control those terrifying ninja assassins, even manipulating the hand like his own private military corps. All of this checked out. But the problem was, from start to finish, Frank hadn't mentioned one name. A man who was practically Kingpin's sworn enemy. Daredevil, Matthew Murdock. Su Ling actually had a plan. Find Matthew Murdock, let this, Kingpin's exclusive nemesis, serve as high-quality cannon fodder to draw some attention away from himself. That way, the pressure would be at least halved when confronting Kingpin directly. Su Ling was very clear that although he possessed the three talismans, making him seem invincible, he was far from being truly untouchable. I don't eat beef. Facing Kingpin, who controlled New York's underground forces and possessed a monstrous organization like the Hand, the naturally cautious Su Ling had to consider things carefully. Furthermore, he clearly understood that the core objective of dealing with Kingpin was to train the young Spider-Man beside him. This mission was something they absolutely had to do. But now it seemed that the variable Daredevil was completely absent. That meant only the three of them could be deployed in the actual battle. 3 people taking down Kingpin, the thought alone was exaggerated. Clearly, Frank was thinking the same thing. Looking at Su Ling, who had been silent for a long time, he couldn't help but speak again. Let's plan this out thoroughly, Su. Kingpin isn't an ordinary gang leader, the forces behind him. But before he finished speaking, Su Ling smiled and shook his head. I know what you're thinking, Frank. He raised his hand and pointed at Peter standing nearby. Peter's potential is boundless. The night was deep, but the luxurious manor on the edge of Queens was brightly lit like daylight. Kingpin's reaction was faster than Su Ling had anticipated. The news of the complete annihilation of the Hand's first wave of assassins had clearly been relayed back. Or perhaps Kingpin had sensed the danger in advance using his abnormally keen intuition. At this moment, the manor was heavily guarded. Tall walls, patrolling armed agents. Even more terrifying were the shadows, almost impossible to catch with the naked eye, flickering back and forth across the walls and rooftops. That annoying group of ninjas had clearly saturated the entire manor. Right now, Su Ling stood atop a distant building, hands in his pockets, and said with a smile. What a grand gesture. Kingpin. He slightly turned his head and continued speaking to Peter next to him. Are you scared? Peter shook his head with almost no hesitation. No, Master. I'm more worried about holding you back. Although Peter didn't know exactly what the dragon talisman was, the aftershock that had nearly suffocated him that night had already made Peter understand that it was a terrifying force capable of destroying an entire street. And his master had chosen not to use that move to destroy the manor before them. The clever Peter naturally knew the reason. Everything was being done to make him grow up quickly. Not to mention that guy Kingpin dared to threaten his family. On that point alone, Peter couldn't possibly forgive him. Seeing the fire burning in Peter's eyes, Su Ling's lips slowly curled up. Very good. Then, let's go. As soon as he finished speaking. Whoosh. Su Ling's figure vanished instantly. Several large question marks popped up over Peter's head. What about the plan? What about the tactics? Just one sentence, and then straight into the action. Mr. Wade really didn't lie to me. After being stunned for a full 2 seconds, Peter took several deep breaths. As expected of Master. No tactics are the best tactics. Swish. Web fluid shot out from his wrist, accurately sticking to the building ahead. Peter was pulled forward like a bullet, speeding toward Kingpin's manor. After landing, Su Ling and Peter hugged the outer wall and proceeded quietly. They did not choose to force their way through the main entrance. After all, the firepower density of Kingpin's manor was comparable to a small military base. Charging in head-on would be suicide. Surprisingly, although the perimeter guards were numerous, their penetration was ridiculously smooth. About 5 minutes later, the two had silently infiltrated the inner area of the manor. This was a plaza-like area, immensely spacious. Peter whispered in surprise. "Master, where is Mr. Frank? He didn't rush into the main building alone, did he? No one is that stupid except Wade." Su Ling narrowed his eyes and looked ahead. "Frank set up some things on the perimeter. We'll retreat immediately after we deal with Kingpin." "Oh, I see." Peter nodded. But the next second. Buzz. The spider sense exploded in his mind. Danger appeared. Peter's body tensed up instinctively. "Master. There are people up ahead." Su Ling hummed softly. This was expected. Tap tap tap, footsteps came from the darkness. 1, 2, figures in a row stepped out from the shadows. Peter was momentarily at a loss for words to describe the appearance of these individuals. But one thing was certain, they were all mutants. No wonder we got in so easily. So they gathered a bunch of mutants and waited for us. Su Ling glanced at the individuals and couldn't help but mock. Bullseye, Nuke, Owl, these are all Daredevil's enemies. If I ever meet that guy, he'll have to compensate me. Saying this, Su Ling looked up and shouted. "Kingpin, stop hiding, come out." The lights in the upper corridor suddenly flared. Creak. The large door, made of expensive wood, was pushed open. Following it was a colossal shadow that nearly obscured the door frame. Kingpin's massive figure stepped out one step at a time, and behind him, Han followed with his head respectfully bowed, like an obedient hound. First, he overlooked the entire plaza, then Kingpin fixed his gaze on Su Ling. He did not look at Peter, and even ignored the assassins and mutants who had served him for years. It was as if, apart from Su Ling, no one else was worth his attention. After a moment of silence, Kingpin slowly spoke. "You must be that Asian man." Su Ling did not immediately reply. His peripheral vision swept over the enemies slowly approaching in the distance. These were all major troubles in the New York underworld, capable of making ordinary police officers pull their hair out for 3 years. Bullseye, Kingpin's chief assassin. Leland Owsley, who possesses temporary flight ability and also serves as Kingpin's accountant. Nuke, who is physically modified into a super soldier. As well as several others he didn't recognize, all of whom were fierce and vicious killing machines. However, Su Ling's gaze did not linger on them for too long. His eyes remained fixed on the man standing motionless like a statue on the far right. He had blonde hair, yet his expression was lifeless, and his physique was so strong it looked reinforced with steel bars. No emotion, no gaze, no humanity. Su Ling remembered this guy. Omega Red, a mutant from Russia. Among this group of murderous maniacs, he was undoubtedly the most troublesome and dangerous presence. This guy's abilities could not be summarized merely by the word, strong. His body could release deadly spore pheromones. Ordinary people would be incapacitated or even die within seconds of inhalation. Tentacle-like energy limbs could drain life force, causing opponents to weaken instantly. The more he drained, the stronger he became. His base strength allowed him to arm wrestle with tanks, and his recovery ability was heaven-defying. If Nuke was War Machine, then Omega Red was war itself. Furthermore, as one of Wolverine's old adversaries, in certain Marvel side storylines, he was indeed recruited by Kingpin as his ultimate enforcer, specifically handling trouble that even the Hand refused to touch. It seemed Kingpin had brought this guy out just to deal with him. Sneering internally, Su Ling quickly formed a rough tactical map in his mind. He patted Peter's shoulder. The latter instantly straightened his back, thinking his master was about to assign some complex strategy, and immediately whispered. "Master, I understand. The strategy is, from left to right, taking them out one by one, right? That's exactly what I was thinking." As he spoke, Peter's eyes flashed with an expectation that screamed, "I'm smart, praise me quickly." Hearing this, Su Ling smiled and shook his head. "No, Peter. You misunderstood." Peter froze. Huh. Su Ling raised his hand, pointing at the large group of top assassins and mutants opposite them, then slowly shifted his finger until it rested on Kingpin's massive figure on the top floor. What I mean is, you go deal with Kingpin. The rest. Su Ling took a step forward. I'll handle alone. Peter. The voice was not loud, but it clearly reached the ears of everyone present. A brief silence. Kingpin froze for a few seconds, his massive figure pausing slightly. He had never expected the Asian man to say such a thing. The next second, however, he shook his head, displaying a sense of boredom, as if he were watching a mere clown. Su Ling. I've lost interest in you. In his eyes, Su Ling was, at best, just a slightly faster mutant. Setting aside whether Su Ling could survive, he actually had the audacity to tell that little brat to deal with him. That was ridiculous. The assassins and mutants below also openly displayed ridicule and contempt. Bullseye sneered. Did this Asian guy get his brains scrambled in a highway crash? Owl and Nuke directly took half a step back, as if afraid that laughing out loud would ruin their image. And Omega Red, standing on the far right of the group, also flashed contempt and impatience in his eyes. It was as if everyone was asking simultaneously. Is your brain full of water, kid? Or do all you Asians enjoy courting death so much? But amid this chorus of mockery, the air around Su Ling began to writhe frantically. Dense numbers of Shotokan began to continuously surge forth. You like laughing. Let's see if you can still laugh later. Beneath the light, there is never a shortage of darkness. And in the dark corners of the international metropolis of New York, there is one place constantly shrouded in shadow. That is the area named Hell's Kitchen. This is the most chaotic and twisted district in New York, bar none. Violence, crime, conspiracy, woven together into a vast underground network. Matt Murdock lived in such a place. By day, he was the gentle lawyer who always wore a faint smile. By night, he transformed into the existence that criminals least wanted to face, Daredevil. Tonight, he should have routinely put on his mask and punished evil while promoting good in Hell's Kitchen. But at this moment, Matt was completely different from usual. He sat at a table, carefully wiping down his weapon. His expression carried an unprecedented solemnity. No one could see the kind of fluctuations currently shimmering in his blind eyes. Only he knew that tonight a major event would occur that would determine the future direction of the entire New York underworld. He was going to assassinate the underground emperor whom even madmen feared, Kingpin. In truth, Matt Murdock was not unfamiliar with Kingpin. Or rather, Kingpin never bothered to hide himself. But even so, Matt had always restrained himself. Because he knew better than anyone that Dark Order is still order. Kingpin was brutal and cold-blooded, but he at least maintained the stability of the underworld. And once this massive rock was overturned, violence and chaos would quickly tear apart this already precarious place. That is why Matt Murdock had constantly held himself back. Until his beloved woman was murdered, and the killer was none other than Bullseye, Kingpin's subordinate. At that moment, Matt completely abandoned the so-called balance. He put on the suit symbolizing night and vengeance, fastened his mask, and transformed into Daredevil. His keen hearing picked up the sound of the wind, distant car horns, and even the conversation of a couple walking their dogs several kilometers away, all perfectly clear. Daredevil leapt from the rooftop, rapidly moving through the darkness. Soon, he arrived at the mansion where Kingpin was located. He had originally expected to face defenses like an iron wall. But tonight, Kingpin's mansion was eerily quiet, as if someone had already ripped a huge opening in it. Sneaking in, Matt encountered almost no resistance. Patrol teams were nowhere to be seen, and traps and mechanisms were unresponsive, as if the entire mansion had been drained of its soul. Something is wrong. Daredevil frowned deeply, but his pace quickened. The deeper he went, the more chaotic the residual sound waves in the air became, the aftermath of combat that only he could detect. The echoes from shattered walls, the lingering sounds of metal collisions, the reverberations of compressed air bursting. All this pointed to only one possibility: a massive, earth-shattering battle had just taken place here. Finally, the moment Daredevil stepped into the core area of the mansion, his entire body froze. He saw. Daredevil swore he would never forget the scene before him until the moment he died. In the distance, an Asian teenager was surrounded by the wreckage of various corpses. He was holding a blood-soaked, blond man in one hand, dangling him like a dead dog. The man's chest was collapsed and deformed, he was barely clinging to life. Matt recognized that guy, he was the mutant Omega Red. Surrounding Su Ling, shadows surged like a tide, and dense shadow life forms climbed out, from the ground, walls, and even directions Daredevil couldn't comprehend. They encircled Su Ling, every shadow entity carrying a silent yet deafening killing intent. And there were those assassins, familiar or unfamiliar to Matt. Nuke lay beside a broken steel beam, his chest pierced, lifeless. The owl, Leland Owsley, had his head smashed flat at a strange angle. There were also a few assassins he hadn't seen before, possibly mutants. But it didn't matter, their limbs were twisted, their expressions terrified, as if they had witnessed a nightmare before death. Daredevil felt his own breathing tremble. He saw Bullseye's corpse. This monster who killed the person he loved, this enemy he had pursued and failed to catch countless times, was now being tossed onto the ground like trash. In this moment, Daredevil's mind went blank. He couldn't even determine what exactly was standing before him. A person, a monster, a demon, or an existence sent by God to punish the wicked. How is this possible? Daredevil's lips trembled, he truly couldn't fathom what had happened. At least a dozen monster-level opponents under Kingpin's command, all lay defeated at the feet of that teenager. That kind of power, that destructiveness, that sense of oppression. Daredevil felt his scalp tingle all the way from his spine to the crown of his head. Instinct made him take half a step back. The teenager before him was too dangerous, he couldn't tell if he was friend or foe. So Daredevil activated his sharpest, most reliable weapon, perception. Heartbeat, blood flow, muscle tremors, air vibrations, every detail formed in his mind like a high-frequency scan. He poured his entire, auditory radar, onto Su Ling's body. Thump, thump, thump. That was the sound of a heartbeat. And it wasn't a rhythm of nervousness or anger, instead, it was powerful and vigorous, like that of a fierce beast. Daredevil frowned. This kind of heartbeat was completely different from a human frequency. How could a body operating at such a high frequency not suffer strain? Is he a mutant? No, that's not right either. No mutant could be this formidable. Doubt filled Daredevil's heart. But in the next second, his eardrums felt as if they were being ripped open from the inside by some giant beast. Boom! A piercing sonic wave erupted, and Daredevil's face instantly twisted in pain. He instantly understood, this was backlash. It was the consequence of trying to use his perception to probe an existence that should not be probed. Cold sweat instantly broke out on Daredevil's forehead, and he hastily retracted his perception ability. Calm down, don't mess around. He gasped heavily, desperately gripping the cracked wall surface, attempting to stabilize his body this way. While Daredevil was struggling to return to normal, the teenager in the distance who had overwhelmed his perception slightly tilted his head. Su Ling merely glanced at Daredevil, then clenched his 5 fingers, and Omega Red's neck was snapped clean off. In his final moments, this guy couldn't understand why his spore ability, potent enough to kill hundreds of people, and his terrifying tentacles that could drain the life force of super-powered individuals, were all meaningless jokes in front of Su Ling. But he could no longer ask. Because in Su Ling's eyes, he was just bothersome garbage. How could a noble steed be defeated by such abilities? Su Ling lifted the corpse with one hand and tossed it casually beside the ruins like a rag. Immediately after, he had a thought. Countless shadow ninjas surrounding him scattered like a tide, surging out from the shadow beneath his feet. In Daredevil's acute hearing, countless, non-human, sounds of movement appeared. The remaining forces within the entire manor were being silently dealt with by this strange group of guys. Su Ling looked up, gazing in a certain direction above, and shouted. Peter! Stop playing around. Bang! With a massive crash, the entire wall of the second-floor corridor above was smashed through from the inside. Immediately after, a massive figure was thrown out of the opening. Kingpin's body tumbled twice in midair before crashing onto the ground with a boom. The face of this underground emperor was completely unrecognizable. His nose bridge was collapsed, his cheekbones shattered, even the act of opening his eyes had become a luxury for him. Peter rappelled down from above on a web line. He panted as he ran to Su Ling's side, his face flushed with excitement. Master, this guy is so weak. Question marks popped up rapidly above Daredevil's head in the distance. Holy cow, you just knocked Kingpin down from up there like that. At your age, is it really okay to do this? And what the heck is, Master? Chinese Kung Fu, is it? Su Ling didn't react much, just smiled and nodded. In the original work, Kingpin couldn't beat Peter anyway. Although this guy was a monster among humans, he had no chance of winning against a superhero like Peter. What's more, Peter had been training under Su Ling for the past few days. That was training with the Shotokan as sparring partners. It could be said that the current Peter had completed the first stage required for a true hero's growth, making him far, far stronger than his counterpart in the original timeline. Well done. Su Ling patted Peter's shoulder. A human strongman like Kingpin makes a great whetstone for you. Hearing the praise, Peter was about to offer a modest reply when he suddenly noticed someone standing in the distance. He subconsciously moved to restrain him with spider silk, but Su Ling stopped him. He's one of us, no worries. Huh. Is that Mr. Frank? Did he also get a mask like Mr. Wade? Su Ling's face twitched slightly upon hearing that. Why did that sound so much like Deadpool? It seems Wade needs to stay far away from Peter in the future, lest he corrupt the kid. Stepping forward, Su Ling approached the dying Kingpin. The man who once made all of New York tremble was now as weak as a paper figure scattered by the wind. Kingpin exerted immense effort to lift his head, using all his remaining strength to say, I still have leverage. I can negotiate. Crack. Su Ling stomped down directly. The sound of a skull shattering was like a watermelon being smashed. Kingpin, the underground emperor of New York, met a gruesome end, leaving no intact corpse. Su Ling squatted down expressionlessly and searched his corpse for a few seconds. He quickly found an item. It was a custom-made cell phone that looked expensive and included anti-tracking encryption. After glancing at it, Su Ling tossed it aside nearby. Then he looked up, his gaze crossing the battlefield wreckage and landing on the red and black figure in the distance. Daredevil's spine stiffened. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Su Ling's voice. Madame Gao is up to you. You know how to handle it. Daredevil's throat tightened upon hearing this, and sweat poured down his forehead. He knew clearly that Su Ling was actively handing the scepter of vengeance into his hands. It was a condescending gesture, yet Daredevil felt not a trace of resentment. He couldn't help but ask. Who exactly are you? But clearly, Su Ling did not want to answer that question. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed Frank. Frank, blow this place up in 3 minutes. After receiving Frank's reply, Su Ling put away his phone and turned to look at Peter. Let's go, it's time for us to head back. The two figures slowly vanished into the night, eventually melting completely into the darkness. Daredevil stood frozen for a full 3 seconds, then sprang up as if electrocuted. He just said he was going to blow this place up, right? The red and black figure rapidly leapt and darted through the ruins. Along the way, he picked up the custom phone Su Ling had casually thrown on the ground, but he had no time to examine it closely. If he delayed any longer, he might end up flying sky high along with the manor. While running, Daredevil couldn't help but glance in the direction Su Ling had left, muttering to himself. I must find out who you are. Su Ling didn't know that Daredevil was currently running wildly and secretly vowing to uncover his identity. He didn't take the red-suited hero's thoughts to heart at all. At this moment, he was walking side by side with Peter in the night. Then, Master, guess what? After I kicked Kingpin away and was about to tie him up with webs, that guy suddenly pulled out an entire, a door panel. Can you believe it? Peter gestured as he spoke, showing Su Ling. Apparently, this battle had opened a new world for the young Spider-Man. Su Ling's eyes held a smile, nodding occasionally in response. Not bad, very impressive. Peter became more and more engrossed in his story, even starting to imitate Kingpin's heavy breathing. He charged at me like a rhinoceros. I was completely. Smack. Su Ling raised a hand and lightly flicked Peter's forehead. And then you got slammed into the wall. Peter froze for a moment, then scratched his head a little awkwardly. Ah. Master guessed it right. Su Ling smiled. The two walked and talked like this, getting further and further away from the manor. Until a loud boom. The night sky was torn apart by a huge fireball. The manor behind them, as if crumpled into a ball of fire by an invisible giant hand, shot up into the sky. Clang! A jeep burst out of the darkness and then screeched to a halt in front of the two. The driver's side door was pushed open. Frank, with an unlit cigar in his mouth, leaned half his face out of the car and said to Su Ling. Everything's blown clean. There seemed to be a guy dressed as strangely as Wade inside. Should I kill him? Hearing this, Su Ling shook his head. No, that guy, he's still somewhat useful. The more superheroes, the better. With that, he reached out and opened the passenger door of the Jeep, then sat down. Peter also quickly got into the back seat. Frank felt that this sentence had a bit of a pretentious flavor. But he wasn't Wade, so he couldn't say so many sassy things. Glancing at Su Ling beside him, Frank stepped on the accelerator. Boom! The tires kicked up dust, speeding away against the backdrop of the flames. The three quickly disappeared into the darkness in the distance. Although the news only lightly reported a major fire occurred in a manor in Queens. But those who have long walked on the edge of the law all knew perfectly well that the area belonged to Kingpin. And when the news of Kingpin's death spread, the underground world of New York was like a nuclear bomb had been dropped, with everyone in various strongholds and intelligence circles whispering. Who could have done this, not only killing Kingpin but also uprooting his entire manor? Fear and curiosity spread in the shadows, but a tacit understanding gradually enveloped all of America. New York has a guy even more ruthless than Kingpin. Time quietly flowed amidst this terrifying public opinion. 5 days later. As Su Ling expected, with Kingpin's death, Peter's family lived more peacefully than they had in years. Even the natives of Forest Hills marveled at how good the public order had been recently. Inside the mercenary bar, loud DJ music filled the air, yet around Su Ling, it was as if there was a layer of air separating him from the outside. He lowered his head, toying with the wine glass in his hand, his expression revealing a rare trace of distraction. Weasel glanced from the bar in the distance, muttering to Wade beside him. Wade, did you delete something from his hard drive? I've only seen that expression on him once before, after Vanessa rejected you. Hearing this, Wade rolled his eyes, then patted Weasel on the shoulder with an "You're still too young." Su Ling probably thinks his apprentice is growing too fast, and he, as the master, is feeling a sense of crisis. Apprentice? You mean that little brat Peter? Of course. But he's not a little brat. Wade picked up his wine glass and chugged down the beer inside. Recalling the sparring with that kid Peter these past few days, he felt a tightening in his backside. That kid isn't human at all. He doesn't seem like a novice who just gained abilities. Several times I almost got stuck to the wall by his sticky webs. Weasel grinned, then mocked Wade a few more times. Even though Weasel had no combat power, Wade had to give way when it came to his sassy remarks. Seeing that he couldn't win against this fool, Wade put down his glass, hummed an unknown tune, and swayed towards Su Ling's direction. Slumping onto the sofa opposite Su Ling, he stretched his neck and asked, "Did I really hit the nail on the head? Are you really jealous of Peter?" Su Ling didn't answer immediately. He leaned back into the depths of the sofa, his hands naturally hanging down. Then he looked up at the ceiling and slowly uttered a sentence that made the air freeze. "No, you're wrong, Wade. I just can't understand why this kid is growing so slowly." Wade froze in place. Slow. You're saying Peter is growing slowly. Is that still considered slow? In 5 days, this brat has already been rubbing me on the ground. You fool must not be fully awake. I think you should ask Weasel to call you a stripper to sober you up. Su Ling didn't respond to him. It wasn't that he was being humble, it was simply the truth. After the side quest countdown ended, Ben and May were both safe and sound. So the side quest was naturally completed successfully. Along with the system's mechanical prompt, Su Ling also gained a new ability. Shendu's demonic power, absorb magic. According to his prediction, after the side quest was settled, the main quest would immediately follow. After all, Kingpin was personally dealt with by Peter. And for so many days afterward, Wade had been providing one-on-one instruction. From every perspective, Su Ling was confident that the main quest would be completed. But he waited for an hour, then 2 hours, and the mechanical sound in his ear never appeared. Then, he simply waited an entire day. Although reluctant, Su Ling accepted the fact. The main quest was not completed at all. This also plunged him into incomprehension and unease. His preoccupied state had continued until now. Su Ling reviewed the entire process but couldn't understand where the problem had occurred. Do I have to defeat all the Spider-Man villains in the Marvel Universe for this quest to be completed? That's ridiculous. Su Ling muttered in his heart, then shook his head helplessly. He shifted his gaze from the ceiling to Weasel behind the bar and casually asked. Weasel, what's been happening these past few days? Weasel replied while wiping a glass. Besides you crushing Kingpin's brain, is there anything more explosive than that? Oh, right, Tony Stark, that pretentious guy, announced that he is Iron Man. A bunch of reporters were screaming there, making it as lively as a celebrity cheating. He put the cleaned glass back on the counter and added. Other than that, nothing special, it seems. Su Ling hummed softly. But the next second, an uncontrollable gleam suddenly flashed in his originally calm eyes. Wait, Iron Man. How could I forget this guy? As everyone knows, the Marvel Universe is a massive cosmos. Unlike many other superheroes, Spider-Man's evolutionary path is mostly reflected in his suits. Aside from the classic red and blue suit known to the public, and the symbiote version, the Black Spider-Man, there are also stealth suits, insulated suits, and countless others from various universal branches. But if we talk about the most practical, comprehensive suit that can quickly transform Peter into a single soldier combat monster, then there is only one answer. The Iron Spider suit that Iron Man built for Peter. This suit possesses a nanotechnology core equivalent to that of Iron Man's Mark 50 and the Black Panther suit. It can freely change its form according to combat needs, transforming into any multifunctional battle configuration suitable for the current environment. The suit can easily adapt to high-pressure and extreme cold environments, and even possesses the capability for space combat. The 4 nano-mechanical claws equipped on the back can extend instantly, and it even has a one-hit kill mode, personally set up by Tony. Most importantly, if the nanoparticles in one section are depleted or damaged, the suit can automatically mobilize nanoparticles from other areas to fill and reorganize. It can be said that the Iron Spider suit is the one Su Ling believes is the most suitable and perfect for Spider-Man. At this moment, Su Ling finally realized a critical issue he had overlooked for a long time. He had previously been caught in a certain misconception. Constantly enhancing Peter's strength, whether through mental growth, combat techniques, or combat experience. These were indeed important and had truly allowed Peter to transform into a qualified superhero within just a few days. But the problem was also obvious. Techniques and experience will eventually hit a bottleneck. Peter is not Su Ling. He doesn't have a system constantly increasing his strength. This path of growth will eventually stop. But equipment is different. Among the countless branches of the Marvel Universe, one constant fact is Spider-Man's strength is closely tied to the intensity of his suit. Most of Peter's leaps in strength occur when combined with a suit, leading to a qualitative change. At this moment, countless images flashed through Su Ling's mind, slowly taking shape. If I can get Peter to wear that suit, would the system also view this as a significant growth? Although this was just his speculation, it was also a move born of necessity. As it stands, Su Ling has done almost everything he can. All that's left is to run around the streets blasting Peter with the dragon talisman. Moreover, time is too important to him. The main quest is related to the growth of his own strength, and he couldn't possibly drag Peter all over the world looking for villains, forcing the kid to rely on continuous real combat to trigger quests. Not only would the danger level be maxed out, but the efficiency would be ridiculously low. Su Ling lightly tapped the wine glass with his fingertips. He wasn't the type to hesitate. Once he thought of something, he would do it immediately. Worrying about consequences. That's the logic of the weak. As for Tony Stark, dealing with a person like him is frankly not a bad thing. He would have to meet him sooner or later. Rather than passively waiting for the plot to push him along, it was better to intervene proactively and control the future trajectory of himself and Peter. As for whether he could successfully obtain the legendary Iron Spider suit, As the old saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. Moreover, he wasn't the type to just hold out his hand and wait for others to give him things. If Tony gave it, great. If he didn't, then I'll force him to give it. Thinking this, Su Ling raised his glass and drank the last drop of liquid. His thoughts retracted, and just as he was about to say something, he heard Wade's wailing voice. It's appeared. It's appeared. The guy suddenly sprang up from the sofa like a spring, pointing at Su Ling's face and yelling. That terrifying expression on your face is back. Tell me, which guy are you going after now? You can take me this time, right? Since Su Ling confirmed that the X-Men apparently don't exist, the plot of Deadpool 2 naturally vanished entirely. Wade's daily life was reduced to just having a world for two with Vanessa. But recently, he could clearly feel this sense of emptiness. If he didn't stir up some trouble soon, he felt he might actually die of boredom. So, as soon as he saw Su Ling display that, "I'm going to pull off a big job" expression, Wade was completely fired up. He grabbed Su Ling's shoulder, pressing his entire mask close to Su Ling's face. Tell me quick, who are you going after? Are we going to film a super big, super exciting, super headline-worthy action movie plot? Su Ling. Weasel. Su Ling finally couldn't take it anymore. He raised a hand and yanked away Wade's, twisted with excitement, face, saying with a hint of disgust. Get away from me. Your breathing is scarier than Kingpin's right before he died. Wade, who was pushed away, did not give up and immediately tried to stick back like a plaster. Reaching out and pressing down on his head, Su Ling looked at Weasel, who was wiping glasses. Brother, do me a favor. Get me some relevant information on Stark Industries. The more detailed, the better. Night falls. Stark Industries Industrial Zone, Sector 16. A blonde-haired white-collar woman quickly walked in, followed by several men in black uniforms. They wore no insignia, but their demeanor certainly didn't match the word security guard. Led by the blonde woman, the group passed through corridors and storage areas packed with shelves, finally arriving at an iron door deep inside the industrial zone. The blonde woman stopped and said nervously, "Agent Coulson, this is it, but my access card won't open it." The man leading this group of men in black uniforms was Phil Coulson, a senior agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. is a special intelligence and security organization dedicated to handling unusual events. This mission, set during the plot of Iron Man 1, was for them to collect evidence after Tony dealt with the villain Ironmonger. But S.H.I.E.L.D's true goal was to obtain and protect the technology behind the iron armor. That's right, protection. After all, this technology had far-reaching implications, and if it fell into the hands of ill-intentioned individuals, the consequences would be unimaginable. The unnamed Egghead felt that this technology absolutely had to be protected. Because he believed that nowhere in the world was safer than S.H.I.E.L.D. Whether the outside world believed it or not, he himself was absolutely convinced of this viewpoint. I'll handle it. Coulson walked straight up, took a small device from his pocket, and placed it on the electronic lock of the iron door. The device flashed red, and Coulson pulled the blonde woman back a few steps. 3 seconds later. Bang! The electronic lock exploded, and the door sprang open slightly. Coulson drew his pistol, pushed open the iron door, and walked in first, followed immediately by several black-suited agents in a fan formation. After only a few steps, they saw a crudely shaped iron armor. The armor was covered in weld marks, lacked a unified structure, and looked like a defective product cobbled together from various scrap metals and rusty parts. That fool Obadiah Stane, he really was the mastermind behind the Tony Stark kidnapping. Coulson stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the deformed armor. It's a good thing Tony has already dealt with this trouble. He gave a look to the agents behind him, and they immediately spread out, ready to search for the technical blueprints of the iron armor. However, at this very moment, whoosh! A sound of rushing air flashed through the space. Immediately after, an agent suddenly felt his feet leave the ground, and he was instantly hoisted up. Snap! He was violently flung toward the wall by a blob of sticky white substance, stuck to the wall like a trapped gecko, unable to move. The remaining agents' expressions changed drastically, but they quickly centered around Coulson, raising their pistols and scanning their surroundings. Enemy attack. Alert! 2 figures appeared in the distance. In the shadows of the warehouse ceiling, a slender figure in black and red slowly descended upside down. Peter Parker, dressed in an all-black battle suit, landed on a steel beam. The suit he wore had smooth lines, personally designed by Wade, combining coolness and flashiness, perfectly matching Deadpool's aesthetic. Peter held onto a web line with one hand, looking down at the bewildered Shield agents below. He tilted his head to look at Su Ling, who was standing beside him, and asked, "Master, should we tie them all up? Thanks for watching."